home compared to in the 1990s. Rents are up 8.6% in the last year, total homelessness at record levels. There are simply not enough homes. Those on the benches opposite knew this, but what did they do for 14 years? As my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, said yesterday, they ducked the difficult decisions, they put party before country. They pulled the wool over people's eyes by crowing about getting 1 million new homes in this last Parliament. But they failed to get anywhere near their target of 300,000 homes a year. And in a bid to appease their anti-housing backbenchers, they made housing targets only advisable. They knew that this would tank housing supply, but they still did it. And as I stand here today, I can now reveal the result, that the number of new homes is now likely to drop below 200,000 this year. Unforgivable. This legacy makes our job all the harder, but it also makes it so much more urgent. So today, I'll explain how Labour will deliver the change needed to turbocharge growth and build more homes. And I'll start with housing targets. Decisions about what to build should reflect local views, but that should be about how to deliver new homes, not whether to. Whilst the previous government watered down housing targets, caving into their anti-growth backbenchers, this Labour government is taking the tough choices, putting people and country first. For the first time, we'll make local housing targets mandatory, requiring local authorities to use the same method to work out how many homes to build. But, Mr. Speaker, that alone is insufficient to meet our ambition. So we're also changing the standard method used to calculate housing need, so it better reflects the urgency of supply for local areas. Rather than relying on outdated data, this new method will require local authorities to plan for homes proportionate to the size of existing communities. And it will incorporate an uplift where house prices are most out of step with local incomes. The collective total of these local targets will therefore rise from some 300,000 a year to just over 370,000 a year. Now, some will find this uncomfortable, and others will try and poke holes. So I'll tackle the four arguments head on. First, that we're demanding too much from some places. To this I say, we have a housing crisis and a mandate for real change, and we all must play our part. Second, that some areas might appear to get a surprising target. Well, Mr. Speaker, no method is perfect, and the old one produced all sorts of odd outcomes. Crucially, ours offers extra stability for local authorities. Third, that we are lowering our ambition for London. I'm clear we're doing no such thing. That London had a nominal target of almost 100,000 homes a year based on an arbitrary uplift was absolute nonsense. The adoption of the London Plan has a target of around 52,000, and delivery in London last year was around 35,000. The target we're now setting for London, roughly 80,000, is still a huge ask. But I know it's one that the Mayor is determined to rise to, and I met with him last week about this. Fourth, some will say a total of 370,000 is not enough. To this I say, ambition is critical, but we also need to be realistic. I want to now move to the Greenbelt. If we have targets for what we need to build, we next need to ensure we're building in the right places. The first port of call must be Brownfield land. We are making some changes today to support this, but it's only part of the answer, Mr. Speaker. This is why we must create more strategic system for Greenbelt release to make it work for the 21st century. Local authorities will have to review their Greenbelt if needed to meet housing targets, but they'll also need to prioritise low-quality grey belt land, for which we are setting out a definition today. And where land in the Greenbelt is developed, new golden rules will require provision of 50% affordable housing with a focus on social rent, as well as schools, GP surgeries and transport links that community need, and improvements to accessible green space. And let's not forget, Mr Speaker, that it was the previous government's haphazard approach to building on the Greenbelt that has seen so many of the wrong homes built in the wrong places without local services that people need. Under Labour, this will change. Now, Mr Speaker, increasing supply is of course essential to improving affordability, but we must also go further in building genuinely affordable homes. And part of this must come from developers. And the Housing Minister will be meeting with major developers later to ensure that they commit to matching our pace of reform. But an active mission-led government must also play its role. This is why today I'm calling on local authorities, housing associations and industry to work with me to deliver a council house revolution. Yeah. Mr Speaker, this isn't just a nice add-on. It is vital to getting the 1.5 million homes built, because we know that schemes with a large amount of affordable housing are likely to be completed faster. And injecting confidence and certainty into social housing is how we get Britain back to building. The previous government had to downgrade the number of new homes their affordable housing programme would deliver. And now today, I can unveil that not only between 110,000 and 130,000 affordable homes are due to be built under this programme, down from their original target of 180,000. In our worst case scenario, some 70,000 fewer families in need of a secure home will lose out, Mr Speaker. How have they let that happen? And once again, it's this government which will have to pick up the pieces. This is why today I'm announcing immediate steps for the biggest boost to social and affordable housing in a generation. Yeah. We will introduce more flexibilities in current affordable homes programme working with Homes England, and will bring forward details of future government investment at the spending review. I also recognise that councils and housing associations need support too. So my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set out plans at the next fiscal event to give them the rent stability that they need to borrow and invest. Yeah. But, Mr Speaker, we must also maintain existing stock, which is why I'm announcing important changes to the right to buy. We have already started reviewing the increased right to buy discounts introduced in 2012, and will consult in the autumn on wider reforms to right to buy. And we are immediately increasing flexibilities for councils when using right to buy receipts. And in addition to help councils provide homes for some of the most vulnerable in society, I can also confirm today that the £450 million of the Local Authority Housing Fund will flow to them to provide 2,000 new homes. This is what Labour does. Mr Speaker, these reforms are key to realising our wider growth ambitions. Part of that comes from new homes themselves, releasing untapped potential of our towns and cities that for too long have been throttled by the insufficient and unaffordable housing. But it also flows from making it easier to build the infrastructure on which we rely. So we're making it easier to build laboratories, gigafactories, data centres and electricity grid connections. And we must make it simpler and faster to build the clean energy sources needed to meet zero carbon energy generation by 2030. We've already ended the de facto ban on onshore wind, but we're also proposing to bring large onshore wind projects back to the nationally significant infrastructure projects regime, NSIP, change the threshold for solar development to reflect the developments in solar technology, and set a stronger expectation that authorities identify sites for renewable energy. To deliver all of this, we need every local authority to have a development plan in place. Up-to-date local plans are essential to ensuring that communities have a say in how development happens. Areas with a local plan are less vulnerable to speculative developments through appeals, and yet just a third of places have one that is under 5 years old. This must change. We will therefore fix this by ending constant changes and disruption to planning policy, setting clear expectations of universal local plan coverage and stepping in directly where local authorities let residents down. Local plans ensure local engagement and are critical to making development that have local people's needs met. But in demanding more of others, we're also going to demand more of ourselves. 2 weeks ago, I said that I will not hesitate to review an application where the potential economic gain warrants it. So today, I can confirm that ministers and I will mark our homework in public, reporting against the 13-week target for turning around ministerial decisions. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know what I've said seems a lot, but this is only the first step. We plan to do so much more. We'll introduce a planning and infrastructure bill that will reform planning committees so that they focus on the right applications with the necessary expertise, further reform compulsory purchase compensation rules so that what is paid to landowners is fair but not excessive, enable local authorities to put their planning departments on sustainable footings, streamline the delivery process for critical infrastructure and provide any legal underpinning that may be needed to ensure that nature recovery and building works hand in hand. We'll also take the steps needed for universal coverage of strategic planning within this Parliament, which we will work with local leaders to develop and formalise in legislation. And shortly, we'll say more about our plan for the next generation of new towns. And because we know that this crisis cannot be fixed overnight, in the coming months, the Government will publish a long-term housing strategy for how we will transform the housing market so it delivers for working people. These are the right reforms for the decade of renewal the country so desperately needs, and we will not be deterred by those who seek to stand in the way of our country's future. The honourable members opposite may say this cannot be done, but I say that once again, I'll prove them wrong. This Government will build 1.5 million homes that are high quality, well designed and sustainable. We will achieve the biggest boost to affordable housing for a generation, and we will get Britain building to spur the growth that we need. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Secretary of State just to say, if you could name between 7 and 8 minutes. Just up to you. Shadow Secretary of State, Kemi Bennell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I echo the Right Honourable Lady's comments regarding the appalling incident in Southport? We on this side of the House send our deepest condolences to the families of all of those who are impacted. Mr. Speaker, having listened to her statement, I have many questions. I know that the Right Honourable Lady won't be able to answer all of them, certainly not in the time that we have today. So I hope that for those questions that she doesn't have the answer to now, she'll be able to provide written answers within a month and before the end of the summer recess so that we can pick up quickly when we return for her department's oral questions in the next parliamentary term. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has a mandate to deliver what they promised in their manifesto. As a party which has governed for most of the last 100 years, we respect that mandate, and it is our job, as His Majesty's loyal opposition, to scrutinise their plans and ensure that Labour are saying what they mean and, more importantly, doing what they say. But with that right to deliver their manifesto come many responsibilities. Labour now have a responsibility, unlike in a manifesto, they have a responsibility to be crystal clear about what they actually want to do to avoid prolonged uncertainty. They now have a responsibility to understand and address the concerns of councillors and local residents. They now have a responsibility to explain the economics and allocate the funding, which we all know will be needed for this plan. And they now have a responsibility not to be contradictory in what they are setting out. So they mustn't make promises which any impartial observer knows can't be delivered. And crucially, they mustn't break their commitments early. And yet, Mr. Speaker, we are already seeing changes to what they committed to. On the 20th of June, the Chancellor stated that they would update the NPPF within 100 days. So why is Labour now briefing that it will be before the end of the year? That's a lot more than 100 days. Yeah. They've just started, they're already changing their targets. So will the Right Honourable Lady confirm that the NPPF will be updated and in effect by mid-October, the deadline that they set for themselves? They are proposing an 8-week consultation over summer holidays for their updates to the NPPF. This is the third set of updates that we will now have in a year. In the previous consultation on the NPPF in 2023, we had 2,600 responses. How will they have a meaningful consultation, which is what the legislation requires, that respects the input of local planning authorities and others? There will be legal challenges. Are they ready for them? They are proposing multiple changes to planning, the NPPF update, new primary legislation, the Honourable Lady just described, changes to nutrient neutrality, which they've recently converted to, and the NSIP, just to name a few. So the Right Honourable Lady says she wants to end constant changes and disruption to planning policy. That's great, but how is she going to avoid creating years of uncertainty and making it harder for local authorities and developers to build new housing as all of these changes are worked through? As I said to her the last time we sat opposite each other, these things do take time and these things are not as straightforward as she is laying out. The government will not be able to deliver its ambitions unless it recognises that. But what is most interesting in this statement, Mr. Speaker, is that she confirms that she is reducing the housing need calculation for London. Can she confirm if that reduction will apply to other urban areas? And can she explain why she is reducing the need for cities like London to build more housing when they are the ones who have the infrastructure to support it? Why is she forcing suburban and rural areas to take more housing when there are schools in Hackney, like de Beauvoir Primary School and Randall Creamer Primary School, that are shutting down because they don't have enough pupils? Why is she doing that? The government is talking about the grey belt in the planning framework. It's very interesting. I've had a quick look through. They define it, but what limited contribution to the 5 green belt purposes actually means in planning terms? What does that actually mean? Because if they're not clear, planning inspectors will determine that, and we will yet again have more and more local opposition. It is also interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the government is considering changes to restrict the right to buy. The Right Honourable Lady has told us very proudly how she was able to buy her own council house. Can she, at least one certainly, can she confirm to us that following these changes, young people across England will still be able to exercise the same right to buy that she herself had in 2007? Shame. Mr. Speaker, there is also a responsibility to address the concerns of councillors and local residents. I know from my own constituency the references that they have to traveller sites will cause some concern. The fact that she has stood up and said many of the housing allocations will be surprising. This is very difficult for local councils and local communities to deal with. Where is the respect for local decision-making? We're not saying that they shouldn't be ambitious, but they're going to have to take local government in hand when they do this. They say they want to impose exacting mandatory housing targets on local authorities. When we had the advisory target, it was so that councils could make sure that they could do better, not do worse. So it is wrong for her to claim that this was us removing mandatory housing targets. Councillors have repeatedly told me that they are afraid that they will be forced, under a duty to cooperate, to sacrifice their own green spaces to take the housing need that the urban leaders who are her friends fail to meet. So what's she going to say to reassure leaders in places like Bromsgrove, Wychavon and South Staffordshire? And what penalties will she apply to local leaders like Sadiq Khan who fail to meet their housing need requirements? What happens when the mayor fails to meet even these reduced targets that she has set for him? She's already let slip that she is ditching the requirement to ensure that beauty is a key part of housing, something that I was actually very proud that the previous Conservative government put at the heart of our planning reforms, because local people do want beautiful housings. So now she's telling us that she's going to be replacing what they want with a requirement to meet 1.5 million ugly houses instead. Why on earth would they take out something? Why on earth would they take out something which means so much to local communities? People deserve to live in beautiful homes, and the fact that the Labour Party doesn't care about that shows exactly how they're going to develop their policies. Their responsibility to explain the economics and set out how they will fund their proposals is also quite key. They need to ensure that the NPPF has a new growth-based approach, they say, but that's already in the NPPF. She would know if she had read it. I bet she hasn't. The Chancellor effectively killed off some major NSIP schemes on Monday, like the Arundel bypass. Is there all this talk of prioritising infrastructure, energy projects, just a way of dressing up cuts to other kinds of infrastructure. Where is the economic analysis that her department has undertaken on the housing market? Yesterday, we all saw the Chancellor come to the dispatch box, claim not to have understood the pressure on public finances and how it was all so difficult. We warned repeatedly during the election. They say one thing and they do another. They said they weren't going to raise taxes. Now we can see what they're planning. But the Chancellor did not say anything about the impact on housing. So now I'm asking the Right Honourable Lady, on behalf of the British people and local authorities, what it means for them. Is she going to follow the same playbook, pretend she didn't know what it costs to build affordable housing, or to change the planning system and impose more costs for builders, home buyers and renters? These are just a few of the questions that the government will need to answer, and I'm sure colleagues across this House will have many more questions for them. But the government is in danger of choosing the worst of all worlds, not addressing basic economics of house building, centralising decision-making, and when you look at all that, it looks like the 1.5 million homes will be a distant aspiration rather than a meaningful target. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let me start by welcoming the Right Honourable Lady to her place, and can I wish her luck for her leadership campaign now she's confirmed she's running.
The best of luck.
So it was her ambition all along to be leader of the opposition, not mine. I must say, the Honourable Lady seems to be taking to opposition very naturally. I think she'll find herself comfortable for a long, long time on those benches. I mean, the Right Honourable Lady had a lot to say in her response, and I'll come to the substance of it in a moment. And I know that the Right Honourable Lady's already put quite a few written questions in, and I look forward to many more from her once she's had a chance to read and digest her brief after the election. But it felt like there was a couple of things I'm not quite sure she understood. Firstly, and this is critical, the British people kicked them out of office in a landslide victory. And secondly, why was that? So let me just remind her. The government in which she served has left us to clear up the mess. They crashed the economy and trashed our public services. They bankrupted Britain and they covered it up. They knew that they threw the book at the doctors and then they doctored the books. She keeps speaking about the Tories' record on housing, but I'll remind her again. Year after year, the Tories failed to keep their housing targets. She speaks about the Mayor of London with their bizarre figures that they set for the Mayor. Every single year, the Conservative government failed to meet their own target, talking of promises that they can't keep. I'll come to the Right Honourable Lady's question on the MPPF consultation. It starts today, Madam Deputy Speaker, for 8 weeks, and we're asking people to engage. It's an incredibly detailed consultation because we mean business, and it wouldn't come to any surprise that the work needed to be done after the disaster of the last Tory government that ripped up the National Planning Policy Framework and made a right mess of it. The former Tory Secretary of State handed back $1.9 billion of vital funds. The Right Honourable Lady talked about the Affordable Homes grant. The last Secretary of State handed back $1.9 billion funds to the Treasury. So we will be making it more flexible, working with Homes England to get the homes that we need. The party opposite...
You're just reading. You're supposed to be answering the questions.
They are the questions. No, they're the bits I've written, actually, in regards to her questions. The party opposite is now talking to themselves and not the country. And they talk about, and the Right Honourable Lady mentioned chaos and uncertainty. I really don't know how they can say that with a straight face after the chaos and uncertainty we've had. Countless housing secretaries not knowing what was going on. And there is increases, Madam Deputy Speaker, in answer to the question. In every inner city area, there is increases in the targets. And can I remind honourable members that we inherited the most acute housing crisis in living memory. And I say to the Right Honourable Lady, the Greenbelt definition is in the consultation. I suggest she reads it. And it also tackles beautiful homes, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we will build homes at scale. They will be beautiful. We'll protect the natural environment. We will make sure that people have the homes that they deserve and that they need. And I come to the point the Right Honourable Lady made about councils and representing council leaders. I find that astonishing because the council leaders that I've spoke to were absolutely overjoyous with the fact that the Tories were kicked out, because the council leaders say to me that they have been left with a dire situation, an absolute dire situation. I know the members opposite like to think it's just Labour councils, but councils across the whole political spectrum have been left in a disaster situation because the party opposite did not build the homes that people need. We have a homelessness crisis in this country. We have a crisis where people under the age of 30 cannot get homes now. It is impossible for people to get on the housing ladder. That is the failure of the last Conservative government. That is what we're going to fix, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's what we're going to get on and do.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome you to your place. Can I first of all really welcome both the ambition of my right honourable friend's statement and the details involved in it and those commitments. Let's get 2 points. In terms of the targets, and the Select Committee in the last Parliament said the targets had to be mandatory. If they aren't mandatory, many councils will simply choose to ignore them. But in mandatory targets, she gave an assurance that the targets were based on a proper needs assessment of each local authority and will do away with the nonsensical and arbitrary urban uplifts which she referred to in the case of London. And secondly, in terms of social housing, and I was proud to be brought up in a council house like she was. In terms of social housing, will she work closely with local authorities and look particularly at land value capture? Where the planning permission for a site uplifts the value of that site, will she ensure that the total increase in value does not go to the landowners alone, but actually is used to benefit the public purse and reduce the cost of building those homes?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I can confirm that we are getting rid of the urban uplift, and the new method of housing targets is better than the previous one, because the previous one we believe was outdated and figures the urban uplift the figures were plucked from thin air. So we believe that our new method would give councils stability and certainty to plan for their homes and local services they need. In terms of land value capture, again, this will come forward with more. There's a little bit within this consultation, but there's more within the planning and infrastructure bill that will come forward, as we spoke about in the King's speech.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I welcome you to your place. May I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for giving advance sight of her statement, and to associate myself and my party with her remarks about the devastating and senseless attacks in Southport. Our thoughts and prayers are with all those affected. Now, for too long under the Conservatives, we had a planning system that put developer greed over community need, a system which did not deliver the homes that we needed to tackle the crisis, but did destroy swathes of our greenbelt. But this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, raises a lot of questions. So here we go. First of all, for those local authorities which are at an advanced stage of their draft local plans, will they need to start again with the new standard method, or can they continue? Secondly, for those local authorities that have recently conducted a Greenbelt assessment, do they need to do it again under the new system, or will the current one stand? There seemed to be a conspicuous absence, Madam Deputy Speaker, of a particular target on social homes, not affordable homes, but on social homes. Will the Deputy Prime Minister take up the Liberal Democrat target of building 150,000 social homes every single year? We welcome the proposals by the government to review the compulsory purchase compensation. Will she take up the Liberal Democrat plan to put an end to land banking by reforming the Land Compensation Act so that local authorities can acquire land at a fair value? We welcome the review of the right to buy. Will the government allow local authorities to use that money to replace lost stock? The government indicated that it will be reviewing borrowing rules so that local authorities can borrow to invest. Will they allow local authorities to borrow to invest at a scale that will allow them to put an end to homelessness, overcrowding and housing register waiting lists? What powers and resources will they give to planning authorities so that they can enforce the requirement to put infrastructure first? Will they scrap the cap on developer planning fees. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Greenbelt, there are some local authorities in the London Metropolitan Greenbelt area who, even when they have accounted for all of their brownfield sites and all of their grey belt sites, they still have to build thousands and thousands of homes on the Greenbelt, land which is supposed to be designed specifically to stop urban sprawl. Will the government put anything in the MPPF that will give any protection to the concept of Greenbelt at all? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you for those questions. In terms of local plans, it depends on where they're up to in terms of the direct question you asked, and there will be a transition, and we outline that within this consultation because we recognise areas have got quite far on. And in terms of where that's up to, it very much depends on what the difference is between what their local plan says and what we've asked, and we outline all of that in the consultation as well. We've been fair to those that have already done the work, so where that work has already been done, it's just about updating it and not disregarding where people already have local plans. But I say to the Honourable Lady that a third of areas have up-to-date local plans, so I would impress on all members of this House to speak to their local authorities to ensure that they have a local plan, because that is how we critically make sure that people feel engaged as part of that process, and we protect areas of Greenbelt and other areas by ending the speculative developments that we see. In terms of social homes numbers, again, I talked about the flexibility in the Affordable Homes Grant. There's stuff within the consultation here about the right to buy, which I recognise, and how the council and also housing associations can borrow to bring up their stock. I recognise the problem we face with the homelessness crisis, and it's something that I'm particularly keen to tackle. We also talk about the compulsory purchase orders, and again we're doing a consultation on that because we think that that needs to be dealt with. We will also bring forward some of the other issues within our planning infrastructure bill. Planning will be strengthened. We've already announced 300 extra planners, local planners. We'll strengthen 106. We'll have an accelerator task force for those stalled sites that we have. And again, where there is a release of grey belt, they will be the golden rules that I outlined. So therefore, we will expect a lot from developers when they're in use of that. And also, we consult on fees as well within this consultation period. There is a lot within this consultation, but I believe that it will make a significant difference with engagement with local areas and to make sure that we meet the housing target that we need and that the country desperately deserves.
Rachel Hopkins.
Deputy Speaker, too many families are housed in substandard, overcrowded flats created through permitted development rights, such as former office block conversions. So will the Deputy Prime Minister give families in my constituency of Luton South and South Bedfordshire some hope for the future by confirming Labour's commitment to good quality, affordable family houses, including council houses, under her proposals?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right. 14 years of the Tories have left social and affordable housing in a crisis, and this is to fix the overall problem that we've got with the housing crisis that we face. We have to have more social housing for rent, and I hear this. The right honourable lady opposite was talking about speaking to local councils, but members here, including new members, will know that their casework that comes through in their box already, their posts that they've seen, and their local leaders are saying what a desperate situation it is, and it's because of the supply problem, and it's because we need to fix the problem around social and affordable housing, and that's why we've got our golden rules. That's why we're going to strengthen 106 and expect the developers to do what they say they're going to do, and all of our departments are going to work to make sure that the infrastructure is there so people get the homes that they need locally and that they see the infrastructure that improves their local area and nature.
Desmond Swain.
New Forest District has its local plan recently agreed on the basis of a local housing need. When will it be required to reopen that assessment on the basis of her new algorithm and that target become mandatory?
Well, the short answer is when the next point when it updates, but as I said before in my answer to the Honourable Lady, those that have an up-to-date local plan won't be made to start again. So it's good, and I commend the Honourable Gentleman's local authority for having an up-to-date plan, because that is the best way to have consultation with your local area and provide the housing that local people need. And that's what this government wants to do, working with local leaders, working with mayors to make sure we deliver the houses that local people want and deal with the crisis that they face.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable friend for making a superb statement. My right honourable friend knows that she will have strong support on these benches for building homes that she has identified that we particularly need in Liverpool to tackle homelessness, rising costs and the huge waiting lists for social housing. But councils will be reluctant to build if they know they will simply end up in the hands of private landlords who exploit the right to buy. So I welcome her review into the higher discounts imposed by the last government. And can she assure me that this will be a rapid review? Because with the mess that she's inherited, there is no time to waste in clearing this up.
I thank my right honourable friend for that question, and again, short answer is yes, it will be a rapid review. We've already been speaking about this even before the election, and we want to make sure that people take part in that review, but we're also very clear that the right to buy formula that the government set out in 2012, the discounts, means that councils just cannot replace the houses that are bought under the right to buy scheme. We believe that people should have the right to buy, but it has to be balanced against what the public give in discounts on our social housing stock and making sure that we can replace that stock for those that desperately need it.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This announcement, quite frankly, will be a disaster for my Hamble Valley constituency. And in Hamble Valley, Liberal Democrat Eastleigh Borough Council has built over the last few years double the number of houses required by targets and assessments. So can the Secretary of State confirm that she will take into account retrospective building numbers for those areas who have already built more than their fair share? And why is she placing even more pressure on local services in the southeast where house prices are the most expensive, but leaving cities alone and not increasing house numbers there too?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, they do increase. They do increase, and the new method that we'll be using is based upon what stock and also the affordability. So I ask the honourable member to look at the consultation on it, because what we want to do is be honest that if there is a particular shortage, and there's many areas that has a particular shortage, that we have to be building those homes. We stood on an election mandate to do that. Now, local plans, I don't know if the honourable gentleman's local authority has them. We will engage with them on that, but we do not have the homes that we desperately need. And I say to the honourable gentleman, engage with the local authority, get those local plans in place and work with us to build the houses that his constituents desperately need.
Yeah.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today, and particularly welcome the acknowledgement that where there are new developments on Greenbelt, that the facilities that go with them are so necessary. But can I ask the Secretary of State what steps should be taken to ensure that local communities can hold developers to account for the protection of our habitat and open spaces when they come forward with plans?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And Labour has a Brownfield first policy, and within the outlines that we've put in the release of Grey Belt, there are very strict golden rules on that, and we will be supporting local authorities with making sure that they have the best from 106 notices and that the golden rules apply. I actually think that the consultation that we put out today with the proposals for the national policy, the MPPF, the proposals that we're putting within the MPPF will actually strengthen the release instead of that haphazard way that we've seen it at the moment. And we'll also see the kind of homes that people desperately need in their areas that are affordable to them, including homes for social rent.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Secretary of State confirm two things? One, where local residents have complied with her coming mandatory targets through a neighbourhood plan rather than a local plan, that neighbourhood plan will reign supreme and will not be trampled over by planning inspectors subsequently. And secondly, that protected landscape, what used to be called an area of outstanding natural beauty, of which my constituency is 80%, but now called national landscape, that will also still be of significant protection within the planning system?
Yes, I can confirm that neighbourhood plans will remain and also that the protections remain. I think it's really important, and again what we're saying in terms of the release of the grey belt is that it has to be for the benefit of local natural spaces. We want to see areas where people can, within walking distance, have access. Many people do not have access to those areas. They're inaccessible on the green belt, but we will be protecting, as we have always done, and there's no change to that, areas of natural beauty and parks, etc.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the new MP and former Cabinet Member for Housing of arguably Britain's most successful new town, Milton Keynes.
No way.
I welcome today's statement. It is exactly what we've needed to hear. The struggles and the conflicts that we've had trying to deliver the housing that people in Milton Keynes need has been enormous and a real waste of resource, to be quite frank. But we need not to only build new houses, but to build new communities. Will she meet with me and Milton Keynes City Council so we can discuss how we can help deliver this essential mission so that everyone has a place to call home?
Well, can I welcome the member for Milton Keynes to her place? I've visited Milton Keynes quite a number of times, and what a fantastic example of a Labour new town. And I think the honourable member has already been quite pithy in getting a meeting arranged with my housing minister, and I look forward to hearing more about how we can learn from Milton Keynes and have the next generation of new towns coming forward.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. One of the documents that was circulated to colleagues today was an MPPF with track changes, and buried on page 55 there's a footnote that says that this following sentence is proposed for deletion. The availability of agricultural land used for food production should be considered when deciding what sites are most appropriate for development. That's in the existing MPPF. It is proposed that that's taken out. The UK is only 60% self-sufficient for food, down from the mid-80s when we were 78% self-sufficient. Is the government taking enough account of self-sufficiency in food?
Yes, and we believe that it's already considered within the MPPF, and there's already guidance on agriculture land as well, and in particular high-grade agricultural land. So we believe the protections are already in there in terms of food.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Deputy Prime Minister on her statement today. Slightly disappointed with some of the comments from the Conservative benches, but I hope the Deputy Prime Minister will reject them as the British people rejected them on the 4th of July. Madam Deputy Speaker, like the Deputy Prime Minister, I am fortunate enough, like most people who have a mayor in England, to live under a Labour mayor. Will the Deputy Prime Minister work with me, work with Labour mayors, including her own and my own, and councillors and members of this place, to ensure that we get the right kind of developments in the right places?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he's absolutely right, because what we're trying to achieve today, and the legislation we'll be bringing forward as announced in the King's Speech, is about how we strengthen local consultation. I've already said to members that only a third of local authorities have up-to-date local plans, so this is a wake-up call to say, as part of local planning and having local plans in place, there is an obligation to consult and then consult again on the final plan. So many people who are frustrated by housing that goes up is because of this speculative development, because there hasn't been that engagement. So what we're proposing today, and we've already met with mayors, we've met with council leaders, this is a push that has come not just from local leaders and mayors, but from the voters. I believe that's why we won as large as we did at the general election, because people want to see that change. So we know that that engagement has to continue. We know that we have to work with local leaders and mayors to make this plan a reality, and we're going to work with them to make sure that we get those homes and we get the infrastructure and that we get the next generation of social and affordable housing that the people of this country need.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and good luck in your new role. It is possible to have successful development, but from experience, it has to be something that you do with people and not to people. This is the latter. These pernicious top-down targets have the practical effect at ground level of setting one town against another, one village against another, and one local community against another. And given the Chancellor's statement on public spending yesterday, who will pay for the tens of billions of pounds of infrastructure that would be required to make all of this work? All experience shows that on development and house building, the man or the woman in Whitehall really does not know best. Yeah. Why then are you going back to the old, failed way of doing it, which will not work?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
I mean, I'm shocked that to tell the honourable member that the MPPF was an MPPF before we took government as well. So national targets have always been there. It's not something that I've dreamt up. But the important thing, the important thing is our new method is clearly based upon what the housing stock and the affordability and the need in their area. This is a need that has created a housing crisis in this country, and that is why the electorate elected the Labour government on the mandate that we did, because we said we are going to fix the housing crisis that we've inherited. And I would say that this is again about local plans. I implore the honourable member to get with his local authority, to get a local plan, to engage with local people and to listen to those that are waiting desperately, probably the thousands in his constituency, desperate for a home that they know will never come.
Joe White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My local authority has just agreed its local plan during the general election, and it was the first authority in the country to commit Section 106 funds to our local hospital. As Deputy Leader, I was very proud to lead on this. I see Section 106 funding as the most effective method of mitigating against the impacts of development and bringing in much needed funding for infrastructure. How does the Deputy Prime Minister envision how Section 106 funding can be reformed to make it a far more effective method of bringing in the infrastructure spending?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I congratulate the honourable member, not just for her getting to this place, but also for the work she did previously, and also congratulate the local authority for the work they've done on having a local plan, and also that making sure that they did get what they needed out of the Section 106. And she's absolutely right to say that it's important, because those health needs, whether it's GP services, hospitals, schools, or whatever the infrastructure is, Section 106 plays a very important role, and it needs to be strengthened. We talk about it in here a little bit. We talk about the golden rules that we will apply if Grey Belt is released, but we'll be working with our department to ensure that local authorities are given the resources they need and the expertise from here, so that we can make sure that they get the best out of 106 notices.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thousands of new homes are planned in Kings Lynn in my constituency, but that development requires transport and other infrastructure. So will the Secretary of State work with the Transport Secretary and the Chancellor to unlock the funding for the A10 West Winch Housing Access Road so that development can proceed?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, there is a challenge that we have inherited, and I hope that the honourable member's area has got a local plan when it comes to what they're requiring, and therefore they can push for part of their infrastructure as part of their Section 106. So I'll happily engage through the Minister on that particular issue, but I'm wondering whether the honourable member was in the chamber yesterday and realised what a mess his government left us in.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome you to your new place. Can I start by thanking the Deputy Prime Minister for the speed at which she and her fantastic team are tackling the housing crisis. It is welcome news in Luton North, where my surgeries have been consistently full of people struggling in overcrowded housing, facing skyrocketing rents for substandard conditions. And we have daily cases of people subjected to eviction notices through no fault of their own. Does she agree with me that the government's new plans to build genuinely affordable housing and for this council house revolution to start can't come soon enough for towns like mine?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I think she articulates what many members across the House, even members opposite, will recognise in terms of the challenges that we face. And this issue has been ducked for 14 years by the Conservatives, and in fact it went backwards because of the changes they made to the MPPF in last year. And that's why we're making absolutely no bones about the fact that we do mean to deliver, and that's why this consultation is so important and why we've put that out there now. And I say to honourable members, we do intend to move at pace. People who are in temporary accommodation, 150,000 children that haven't got a home to call their home. I think about that every single night and think there isn't a day that we can afford to waste in terms of dealing with that situation for them. And I promise them across your constituency and everybody else's that I'll do everything I can to make sure that they have a home.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now then, I welcome the news of the Council House revolution. And we all know that the Deputy Prime Minister is a little bit of an expert when it comes to council housing. But can she confirm that priority will be given to British families, veterans and pensioners?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we have confirmed that people with a local connection will get priority in those homes. But I also say to the honourable gentleman who tries to make a quip about the fact that I grew up in a council house, is that many, you know, the situation that I hear, and when I was took on this brief, is that actually people used to talk about my childhood as if I grew up in poverty, but there's many kids today that if they got a council house, it would be considered they'd won the lottery. Those children today can't have that. So we will build the homes. We will prioritise that people locally can get them, and we'll make sure that first-time buyers get first dibs as well. There's a number of measures that we're putting in place to make sure that the homes that are built are there for the people that need it.
Ben Goldsborough.
Madam Deputy Speaker, residents in Heatherset, Mulbarton and Loddon have sadly had all their fingers burnt by the old planning policies that were in place from the previous government. Can you give me assurances that going forward, the Section 106 will be strengthened to ensure that public good, public infrastructure will be in place to make sure that our new housing is accessible for everyone and gives them the resources they need to live a very happy life?
Deputy Prime Minister.
There is parts of this consultation which does look at how we can strengthen 106, and we want to do that in conjunction with local authorities. We are also bringing forward at a later date through this Parliament, which I mentioned in my statement, about strategic planning and also the planning and infrastructure bill. So this is the start of the process, but we know there's a lot more to do, and I look forward to your engagement with that.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, I'm no NIMBY, but today what we're seeing is a lurch back to top-down mandated targets that will ride roughshod through local communities like those that I represent across Aldridge Brown Hills and local decision-making. I do agree with the Deputy Prime Minister, though, when she says that the first port of call must be Brownfield land. So can she confirm that she will do this by giving full financing to Brownfield land remediation and reclamation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we think we can better use brownfield funding, but I say to the honourable member that it's not riding roughshod over local decisions and what local people want, because having mandatory housing targets and plans means that people will be able to decide. What we're saying and what we said at the general election is that we will build 1.5 million homes. We said that really clear, and we have a mandate to do that. We think the new method for housing targets works better. We think it will deliver for people, including the affordability test, and therefore we will deliver the houses that her constituency needs, and I would encourage her to engage with that process with her local authority.
I am planning to end this statement around 20 past, sir. Could you please help each other by keeping questions short? I call Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This has to be the most important statement I've heard since being in the House, and York has really suffered with the proliferation of luxury accommodation, second homes and short-term holiday lets. So I welcome this so much. Could she say what steps can be taken for plans, developers currently with plans in the system, so that we can pivot to ensure that we hit the targets that we need for having the affordable and social housing we desperately need right now?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady that we do need to have these affordable homes that we desperately need, and that's why, depending on where her local authority is in the process, we'll be setting out those targets which are likely to be increased for her local area, and for them to engage in that process. The golden rules are there, which will again allow more affordability where there is a restrictive release of grey belt, and also that we will ensure that we help and support on the affordability and making sure there isn't a gaming of the system, so that we get the best that we can out of Section 106.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I strongly endorse the sentiment and purpose of the Deputy Prime Minister's statement and policy statement today. She's aware that the planning system is, as others have said, fueled by greed rather than need. And in a place like Cornwall, which is not NIMBY, it's one of the fastest growing places in the United Kingdom, it's almost trebled its housing stock in the last 60 years, and yet the housing problems of local people have got worse. So my question to the Deputy Prime Minister is that house building targets are a means to an end, and surely it would be far better in places like Cornwall that those targets be set on addressing the need rather than simply allowing developers to fill their boots.
Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and that's what the new formula does. What we're trying to do is assess the need for areas, and in particular on what their current stock is, taking account of that, but also about affordability. And I suspect Cornwall has a particular challenge with that as well. But what we're hoping to do as part of this as well is strengthen the plans on Section 106, the new Homes Accelerator Task Force, which will help get those sites that have already got planning permission moving forward. And by working across Rayner, we'll go about to deliver the infrastructure that people want as well, because that is the other big issue that keeps coming back, is where we have speculative sites or release of greenbelt, or where there is big housing in an area, that the infrastructure is incredibly critical to that point, and that's what we need to overcome, and that's what we're clear that we need to do as a government.
Helena Dollymore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Hastings and Rye, we are at the sharp end of the housing crisis, and we desperately need more affordable and more council homes. So I really welcome today's statement. The party opposite may behave like this is a zero-sum game between building more desperately needed homes and protecting the environment, but we on this side know that is not the case. So can I ask my right honourable friend what this new government's approach will be to ensure we have sustainable development, protecting our environment and making sure we have the infrastructure, including sewage pipes, and preventing flooding while building the homes that my constituents so desperately need?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member for her question, and also welcome her to her place. And she's absolutely right, and it builds on the question that I answered previously, that we have to protect our green belt, and we think the proposals that we're putting forward does that. But it also means that we have the right type of homes and we have the infrastructure, and that also that as part of this process that there will be nature considerations and the rules around that, there is the infrastructure that people need, and that there is access to the countryside and healthy living. There's a number of factors within the consultation that the Honourable Lady can look at, that will talk about how we're delivering better, greener areas for people, which hopefully her constituents will be able to get behind.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's good to see you in that chair. I'm not sure whether the Secretary of State has discussed her proposals with the Secretary of State for Agriculture or the National Farmers Union, but the answer that she gave earlier in relation to food production was risible. What she's actually announced today is effectively a recipe for disposing of the land that will be needed to feed our children and our grandchildren. And just before she goes ahead with this, Could she tell the House how many planning consents have been granted, are sitting there unbuilt out, and shouldn't we be using those first?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Who was in charge?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but I really do, with absolute respect, say to the honourable gentleman, please read the consultation, because we do think that we do support our agriculture, which is around just over 10% of the land that we have, and we will make sure there's best and most versatile. And I talked before about protecting the land that is of best value, and we will do that. And the land that we're talking about, grey belt, which we define within the MPPF consultation, is not agricultural land. It's disused garages and it's other things of that nature, not, as the honourable gentleman wants people to believe, the land that we need for food.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's twin ambitions set out today to get Britain building, to provide the homes that we need, and to make sure that we have the infrastructure required to support them, like schools and GP surgeries. These are of equal importance, and you cannot have one without the other. Can she confirm that the aim of her package on social and affordable housing is to go net positive, so that the number of social rent homes is rising rather than falling, and achieve it in the first year of this Parliament?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I welcome the honourable lady to her place, and within the first, it is going to be a challenge, but we're absolutely desperate to try and meet that challenge as quickly as we can. That's why we're moving at pace with the consultation exercise that we've put forward today, and we will do that as quickly as we possibly can, so we can make sure that we are making the affordable and social housing we need, as well as making sure that we have the green spaces in the infrastructure that people desperately need as well.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you. Welcome to the Chair, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome to the Honourable Lady to her new role. I appreciate that she won't have time to wax lyrical today about our vision of aesthetics, nor to extend at length on the relationship between truth and beauty. Nevertheless, given the welcome reference in her announcement about proportionality and the link between the existing built environment and the scale of development, will she also take into account the character and style of development? She may know that I've served on the Building Beautiful Commission and the Office for Place. Will she agree to meet the Office for Place to discuss beauty? For she will know that the wealthy can always live in beautiful places, in beautiful homes, but that people from council houses, as she and I originate, deserve their chance to know, to sense and to see beauty.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I absolutely agree with everything that he says, and I know the Minister will be meeting shortly with all of stakeholders, and I think he's got a meeting with those that you've just mentioned as well in the coming days. But I would love to work with the honourable gentleman to make sure that we build the houses that people deserve, whether those social, affordable housing or any other housing. They should be beautiful, they should have character and style, and we're determined to make that happen.
Now Shabar Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I also thank my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, for her statement and the focus that she has rightly given to the delivery of genuinely affordable homes, which will provide much needed housing security to many of my constituents in Gillingham and Rayner. But recognising some of the immediate homelessness challenges felt by local authorities, can she detail how the plans she has announced today relieve pressures on homelessness and temporary accommodation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right to talk about homelessness and the pressures that local authorities face, and it's this issue in particular that I feel quite personal about, because the amount of stories I've heard, not just since I've been in the shadow role as previously, but in the role that I am fortunate and humbled enough to have now, is that we cannot continue with the homelessness crisis. Behind every single one of those figures is a human being, and it really does have an impact like poverty does. Housing has a significant impact on people's lives and opportunities, and that's why, as Deputy Prime Minister and in my role, we'll be bringing different leaders together, a local and regional and here to make sure that we can really tackle homelessness, because we need to do something about those figures. We've inherited a really poor state of affairs, and I'm determined to make sure that we do something about that.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister for her statement. Residents in my constituency of Waveney Valley, as in so much of the country, are finding that many of them are being priced out of being able to live in their local community. The homes that are being built are just not affordable to local people. So I welcome the statement today on affordable housing, but could the Deputy Prime Minister set out, of the 1.5 million homes that she's pledged to build, how many does she expect to be affordable, and in particular, how many does she expect to be council homes? And could she also set out what action will be taken to address the fact that we have 1 million empty homes in this country?
To Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member for his comment. It's really difficult to set out in detail at a particular local level because it's subject to obviously Section 106 and the type of demand. That's why local plans are really important and us supporting that. But I would refer him to the consultation document on, for example, the release of Grey Belt, which talks about a minimum of 50% of affordable. And again, that depends upon what local need is. You have to try and get the balance right, because if local areas are saying we need X, and then I say, well, you're going to have Y, then that's a challenge. But what we have said is that if the Grey Belt is released, that 50% must be affordable. That can be chosen by the local area. If they say, I want a particular amount of social rents, that they can put that in there. And I would say that, again, looking at the document, looking at the methodology that we're using, I think, and looking at the affordability test, I think that that makes things much better in terms of giving a number and a figure that reflects the realities of people in the local area.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I too welcome you to your place. The Deputy Prime Minister will be all too aware the extent to which the current planning system is failing communities like mine. Not building the affordable homes people are crying out for, not delivering the infrastructure my growing communities need, and not even protecting some of the most nature-rich parts of our countryside. But while the opposition benches might not like to hear this, under the last government, Greenbelt approvals, often haphazard, increased tenfold, while Brownfield approvals halved. Yeah. Will the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents that her golden rules will ensure Brownfield and Greyfield sites are truly prioritised and infrastructure and affordability is prioritised too, to finally deliver growth that works for communities like mine?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to mention the haphazard way in which the Greenbelt has been built upon under the last government. You'd think that it never happened in some of the responses I've had back from the opposite side of the chamber. But I'm clear that Brownfield should always be the first port of call, and that's why we've been making Brownfield development easier within the MPPF, and that we'll also be taking firm action to limit the scope of gaming and consulting on how to stop developments who have paid over the odds for land, using that as an excuse for negotiating their Section 106 contributions down. So there's a number of measures, including our golden rules, that will make sure, hopefully, we push towards Brownfield, and that the release of Grey Belt has to be within our golden rules.
Ben Opsijecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Secretary of State and Minister made the decision to approve the appeal made by Envar Composting in relation to the proposed medical waste incinerator on the edge of St Ives, despite the rejection of the initial application by the Conservatives and Labour on Cambridgeshire County Council. Local residents in St Ives, as well as the impacted rural villages of Somersham, Bluntisham, Colne, Pidley, Woodhurst, Oldhurst and Needingworth, are hugely concerned that their opposition and concerns have not been heard by the Secretary of State. So given NHS England's 2023 clinical waste strategy states a need to reduce the use of incineration and details a strategic priority that requires in-house waste processing capability to be developed, why has the Secretary of State approved a medical waste incinerator against local wishes, and will she meet with local residents to hear their concerns?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his contribution, and in the specific case, I've not dealt with it myself personally, but what I can say to you is that when making those decisions, we weigh up the advice and the planning expertise that we have in there, and those decisions will be made based upon that evidence that we have. It's an objective way of making a decision.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's plan to put building homes at the heart of our mission to raise living standards and also to ensure that what we build reflects local views. Will she give an update on our plans to give councils greater powers to tackle the scourge of second homes that, particularly in Cornwall, put a drag not just on our community but our economy as well, so that we can unlock supply through this channel?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and like I said in the opening statement today, this is the first steps. We know there's so much more that we need to do. We've got a significant amount of legislation coming forward, which the Housing Minister will be able to update the House on going forward. But this MPPF is about particular making sure we get the housing targets, but I understand the point that the member's making, and we need to address many more issues that we face in housing, and that's why we had significant amounts of it in the King's speech.
Sir John Whittendale.
There are currently an additional 3,000 homes being built in Malden and Heybridge in my constituency, and the Liberal Democrat-controlled Chelmsford wants to build another 3,000 at Hammond's Farm in my constituency. Yet the local roads, health services, education services are all under intolerable pressure. So what will the Secretary of State do to ensure that necessary infrastructure is put in place before these developments take place?
Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, the honourable gentleman will know that his government was in government for 14 years and could have resolved this, and this is part of the reason why we're consulting on the revised MPPF, because we recognise, and I've said to many honourable members in the chamber today, that infrastructure is critical, that people often reject the housing proposals because they don't see sufficient infrastructure. That's why we have the golden rules. That's why I've asked all of the departments to look at what we can do to make sure that that infrastructure is there, and that's why we'll support strengthening of Section 106 to make sure that developers don't try and squeeze out of what they were promised as part of that development.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend has said, this has got to be about building communities, not just about building homes. But on too many occasions in my constituency, residents have been left for too long on incomplete and unadopted estates. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that both the social and physical infrastructure must be delivered at the earliest opportunity in developments, and that developers must be held to account for the delivery of this?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I absolutely agree, and it goes back again to the point that far too often is the objections to development is because people don't see the infrastructure, and people see that in some cases developers try and wriggle out of their obligations. As I said and set out in the consultation document we're putting forward today, is that we believe that it will strengthen local authorities' hands, and that we'll be able to make sure that we get that infrastructure that we desperately need alongside those houses.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister has outlined the need for house building and the dire need that there is across the United Kingdom, and set out a system to try and achieve that. However, one of the things that's really important is those people who are trying to get mortgages. For instance, here in the mainland here, those who have earned £75,000 a year are having difficulty getting a mortgage. Those back home in Northern Ireland who probably are earning much less, say 40, 45,000, have no chance of getting a mortgage. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister this question? What can be done to help people get mortgages and thereby be able to buy a home and move forward? Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend, I'll say, for his contribution today. And he's absolutely right that we've got to fix the situation, not just on affordability, so those houses come forward. We spoke in the general election, and we'll be bringing proposals forward for a mortgage guarantee scheme. But hopefully the new deal for working people, which is coming forward with the legislation in October time, to make sure that we make work pay. And the Chancellor announced again for public sector workers pay rise, and we recently wrote to the Low Pay Commission to expand their remit, so we'll make sure that over 1 million people will get a pay rise, because jobs that pay will also mean that people can then afford to have their own home.
We now come to the statement from the Foreign Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I want to make a statement on the situation in Lebanon. On the 27th of July, Hezbollah launched a series of rockets into northern Israel and the occupied Golan Heights. Tragically, in Majd al-Shams, one strike killed at least 12 civilians, young people, one just 10 years old, who were playing football. I expend my deepest sympathies to their families and to the Jewish community as they grieve for their loved ones. The government is unequivocal in condemning this horrific attack and calling on Hezbollah to cease their rocket strikes. This atrocity is a consequence of indiscriminate firing, paying no heed at all to civilian life. This attack is part of an intensifying pattern of fighting around the Israeli-Lebanese border. For months now, we've been teetering on the brink. The risk of further escalation and regional destabilisation is now more acute than ever. At the end of my first week in office, I spoke to Lebanese Prime Minister McCarthy, and yesterday I called him again to express my concern at this latest incident. I've also visited Israel and discussed the situation with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Katz. And I will visit Lebanon as soon as the circumstances allow. We support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international humanitarian law. And as I said before, they are in a tough neighbourhood, threatened by those who want to see their annihilation. Over 40, including 24 civilians, have now been killed by Hezbollah strikes in northern Israel and the Golan Heights. And tens and thousands of Israelis have been displaced from the area, while in Lebanon, over 100 civilians have died and almost 100,000 are displaced. A widening of this conflict is in nobody's interest. Indeed, the consequences could be catastrophic. That is why we continue to press for a diplomatic solution based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which called for a long-term solution based on the disarmament of all armed groups in Lebanon, no foreign forces in Lebanon without its government's consent, and no armed forces other than the UN and Lebanese government troops deployed south of the Litani River near the border with Israel. It is why, even in the face of serious provocation, our Council is restrained. We welcome the Lebanese government's statement condemning violence against civilians and urging the cessation of all violence. We continue to support the Lebanese armed forces. The UK has provided more training and equipment to 4 of its land border regiments, and we're working intensively with the United Nations and our partners, including the United States and France, to encourage de-escalation. Madam Deputy Speaker, with our partners, we will do all we can to prevent the outbreak of full-scale conflict, but the risk is rising. I therefore want to underline the government's advice to British nationals. We advise against all travel to the north of Israel and the north of the Golan Heights, and against all travel to Lebanon. There are frequent artillery exchanges and airstrikes. Tensions are high and the situation could deteriorate rapidly. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, chaired a COBRA meeting this morning, and I'm working with Foreign Office consular teams to make sure we are prepared for all scenarios. But if this conflict escalates, the government cannot guarantee we'll be able to evacuate everyone immediately. People may be forced to shelter in place. And history teaches us that in a crisis like this one, it is far safer to leave while commercial flights are still running, rather than running the risk of becoming trapped in a war zone. My message then to British nationals in Lebanon is therefore quite simple: leave. Madam Deputy Speaker, the tensions on the Israeli-Lebanese border are one aspect of a wider crisis in the Middle East. Across the region, we see evidence of malign Iranian activity in their support for Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis and other groups whose actions destabilise the region and who show scant regard for the death and destruction this causes. This government is committed to working alongside our partners to counter Iranian threats. Meanwhile, in Gaza, fighting continues. The scenes at the Khadija school, civilians killed, shocking images of injured children underline the desperate conditions endured by civilians, and the reports of the humanitarian situation remain sobering, with the threat of disease and famine looming ever larger. This government continues to do all it can to provide relief to Palestinian civilians. I recently announced new funding for field hospitals run by UK Med, who have treated more than 60,000 Gazans since the conflict began. And we've restored funding for UNRWA, providing 21 million in new funds to the agency, able to deliver aid at the scale needed. But what is urgently needed, Madam Deputy Speaker, is an immediate ceasefire. All the hostages must be freed. The fighting must end, and much, much more aid must get into Gaza. A ceasefire would not only alleviate the suffering in Gaza and secure the hostages' release, it would also reduce tensions across the region, helping to prevent an escalatory cycle in Lebanon, and offer hope of renewed peace processes between Israel and Palestinians. As I said in the House in my first appearance as Foreign Secretary before this dispatch box, we are committed to playing a full diplomatic role in efforts to secure a just and lasting peace. Our overarching goal is clear: a viable sovereign Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not want to see more civilians killed, more innocent lives cut short, but the risks are clear. We are urging de-escalation of the current crisis while ensuring we are prepared if diplomatic efforts do not succeed, with a clear call today for all British nationals in Lebanon to leave immediately. I commend the statement to the House.
Sharon Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the Foreign Secretary for advanced sight of his statement. This is indeed a matter of profound concern and gravity for us all. The tragic and senseless attack in the Golan Heights over the weekend must be met with full, unequivocal condemnation. Children and young people innocently playing football with bright futures and the rich tapestry of life ahead of them had their lives cruelly snatched away. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, will be with their parents, siblings, friends, and all those affected by this monstrous act. Madam Deputy Speaker, the risk of further escalation across the blue line is real, and the government is right to take it seriously. We do not want to see a widening of this painful conflict, and the opening of a new front would be in nobody's interest. If we are to avoid it, all involved need to show restraint. We should be crystal clear that includes Hezbollah. Let nobody forget this is a proscribed terrorist organisation which has no regard for human life, human dignity or human rights, and nobody should be in any doubt about Hezbollah's intention towards the world's only Jewish state. And Hezbollah supports Hamas, another proscribed terrorist organisation, which has also inflicted appalling suffering, with the worst atrocity committed against Jewish people since the Holocaust and the Second World War. Hezbollah must cease its attacks right now. That message must be aimed at Tehran too. The government must use the communication channels that we have with Iran to be extremely firm with the regime. Iran must use its influence to rein in its proxies and stop destabilising the Middle East. But beyond stern words, we must use all the tools at our disposal to disrupt malign behaviour by Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah, including tough sanctions to crack down on finance sources and flows of weapons. Sanctions must also demonstrate that terror group leaders cannot escape the consequences of their action. The government must also rally the international community to collectively reaffirm its commitment to implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, because that is critical for a long-term peace. If I may, I'd like to press the Foreign Secretary on three specific points. First, what steps is he taking to amplify the advice that he has already and rightly given so clearly, that British nationals in Lebanon should leave now? What is he doing in country to get the message across and make information on how to leave quickly and easily accessible? What steps is he taking to look after the interests of the Foreign Office and other dependents in Lebanon? Secondly, does he have an estimate of how many Brits are actually in Lebanon? And thirdly, what discussions has he had with key partners in the region who, like us, wish to see a destabilising escalation averted? Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to conclude by making a broader point. We are clearly at a critical point in this conflict. We could see Hamas accept the deal on the table, which would see a pause in the fighting, a return of the hostages, a flood of aid, and the space created to bring about the conditions for a sustainable peace. Or we could see the suffering in Gaza grind on and a dangerous escalation along the blue line. This is the time to be putting maximum pressure on Hamas, as we have been discussing today, and on Hezbollah. It is also the time to remain in close dialogue with Israel and maintain our position as a trusted partner, because that is critical, whether for getting more aid into Gaza or for urging restraint by Israel. The Foreign Secretary will have heard concerns in recent days about what many of us perceive as a shift in the government's approach to our close ally Israel, including in relation to the International Criminal Court. The Foreign Secretary gave me an answer on that point in oral questions earlier today. We should make clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that while recognition of Palestine is important and does not need to be at the end of the process, it equally cannot be at the start of the process, where it could be seen as a reward for violence and for terror. I do hope that going forward the government will not only continue to work to avoid an escalation along the blue line, but also maintain this close relationship with Israel. The trust and friendship that exists between the UK and Israel matters because it allows us candidly to discuss all aspects of the current conflict with Israeli counterparts at the very highest levels, in addition to using our influence as a member of the United Nations Security Council. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for the tone and the cross-party nature in which he made his remarks. He knows better than many in this House how serious it is dealing with any crisis that might escalate at this time. He's absolutely right to draw the relationship between Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, with Iran. Of course, we keep our sanctions regime under review, but he's right to press the case about the axis, and he's absolutely right that, of course, we keep all channels open, those that we have with Iran. He'll be pleased to know that I spoke to Prime Minister Mizrani. We talked about the blue line. He will recall that I was in Lebanon a few months before the election was called, and I indicated in oral questions earlier, it is my hope to get to the region once more, taking all advice that he would expect me to take. I want to reassure him that it has been important, of course, to communicate our advice to leave Lebanon, and if you are in the UK at this time, not to travel to Lebanon, and to convey that advice across all channels. And that is taking place. It's been taking place since last night, and it will be taking place over the coming days to communicate that very loudly in country as well. He will also note that we have begun the registration scheme that allows UK nationals to register their presence in Lebanon so that we know where they are, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, we keep the safety of our consular staff in close review, particularly with the dangers that exist with missiles being fired in this way on both sides. Our estimation is that about 16,000 UK nationals are in the region, but of course asking people to register does enable us to know who is there, and of course We urge people to leave on the many flights that are available currently, commercial flights from Lebanon, to leave and make their way to Europe and back home. And of course, we are working with our international partners. He will note that the US, Germany and Canada all upping their travel advice along the lines that we first began yesterday.
Derek Twigg.
Madam Secretary, could I welcome the statement by the Foreign Secretary? In terms of Iran, can I ask the Foreign Secretary, and because he referred to it in his statement about countering Iranian threats, in his short time in office, has he made any assessment yet about how successful they have been?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that we are clear-eyed that Iran continues to destabilise the Middle East through its military, financial and political support for its proxies and partners, including Iranian-aligned militia groups in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah and Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, and we continue to work with international partners to encourage de-escalation and a long-term peace and security in the Middle East.
Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Fraud.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and his advice to British nationals, which seems like a very wise precaution and could potentially involve us not having to evacuate British citizens in the future. I join him in condemning the Hezbollah strike in the Golan Heights, which killed 12 Druze children, and our thoughts go out to their families. But now we find the region on the precipice that many of us have feared since the 7th of October last year, the escalation of the dire conflict to another front, with Israel's Minister Smotrich warning of an all-out war with Hezbollah. The UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process has urged maximum restraint and the immediate cessation of rocket fire across the Blue Line. We welcome that call and urge the UK government to work closely with regional powers to do whatever we can to de-escalate the situation. So my question to the Foreign Secretary is, has he and have his colleagues engaged with the UN Special Coordinator? And if not, will they do so, given the Special Coordinator's vital role in moments such as these? The Liberal Democrats welcome his call for an immediate bilateral ceasefire to end the humanitarian devastation in Gaza, to get the hostages home, and to open the door to a two-state solution. This is a deeply insecure region, and that insecurity is felt by everybody who lives there, by Israelis, by Palestinians, by everybody. A two-state solution will deliver the dignity and security that they need, and I'm reassured to hear the Foreign Secretary will be making those calls on regional powers when he next visits the region.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Lib Dem spokesman for the tone and manner of his remarks. Can I reassure him that I have been in touch with the UN Special Envoy, Amos Hochstein. I've spoken to him several times over the past. I intend to speak to him again over the coming days. And as I indicated, it is my hope to get to the region if the security situation allows. And he's absolutely right. An immediate ceasefire is what we need. We need those hostages out and we need the aid in. But on that point of an immediate ceasefire, if we get that ceasefire, if the Biden plan is adopted, then it allows us to see de-escalation across the region. That is why we need to see that plan adopted by both sides as soon as possible.
David Pincher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I take this opportunity to welcome you to the Chair. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement on Hezbollah's horrific attack and his condemnation of the awful strike in Majd al-Shams. What steps will the Foreign Secretary take to put maximum pressure on Hezbollah to cease its rocket attacks for good?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We've got a long-standing no-contact policy with Hezbollah. However, we of course continue to speak to the government in Lebanon as fragile as that government is. We condemn Hezbollah's destabilising activity And we do obviously coordinate very closely with regional partners, some of whom are in contact with Hezbollah.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Welcoming the Right Honourable Gentleman to his place. He's not technically speaking a Right Honourable friend, but he's a personal friend of mine since my original attempt to stop him being elected in Tottenham many years ago. Thank him for his statement today, Madam Deputy Speaker. He knows well there are many moderate and measured voices in Lebanon and in the Lebanese diaspora too, and I'm glad that he's emphasised the close relationship between our government and our armed forces and the Lebanese army. Will he agree to meet a small group of people who have been associated with the all-party group, of which I've chaired? As you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, all-party groups are reforming as we speak. But there is a group of parliamentarians that have been part of that all-party group. It would be very useful for us to meet him to discuss what more can be done across the House to support the efforts he's described today.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, over my 24 years in this place, the strangest of friendships are struck up across party lines. And so, of course, I will meet with the Honourable Gentleman and the group, because this is a very serious issue, and I know that this is a cross-party issue that all members of this House will want to see de-escalated.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and we must deplore the loss of civilian life, particularly children, on either side of the divide. So welcome his calls for de-escalation in Lebanon and for repeated calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. But looking ahead to the long-term peace, to a two-state solution, how does my right honourable friend deal with the comments of the Israeli Prime Minister the other day, who said that Samaria and Judea are an integral part of Israel and they're not occupying the West Bank? In that situation, hasn't the government got to get on with recognising a Palestinian state rather than waiting for the Israelis to come round to the view it's acceptable to them?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my very good friend who has been championing these issues now for many, many years. And of course, this last period has been of huge concern to him and to his constituents. I was horrified by the degree of expansion that I saw in the West Bank a few weeks ago, more in the last year than we've seen in 20 years. The violence is unacceptable, and the tone and the rhetoric and the statements from some members of the government, I think, is very alarming indeed. And so, as he would expect, I did press these issues with both the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli President, and we keep the situation in the West Bank under close review.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for prior sight of his statement, and I share his deep concern as to where the region currently finds itself. He will not need reminding that in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas atrocity of October the 7th, the international community allowed Israel to blur those vitally important lines between legitimate self-defence and a lust for revenge. As a result, Israel has acted with impunity, and 40,000 civilians are dead, and Gaza has been reduced to rubble. So what discussions has he had with Israel and our international partners to ensure that, heaven forbid, should this conflict escalate further, that all those involved know and understand and accept that revenge and legitimate self-defence are not the same thing under international law, so we avoid in 9 months' time having another 40,000 civilian casualties?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, it was very important for me to visit the occupied territories and Israel within the first week in office. We said this in opposition and we say this again in government. Of course, given the hostages that are still in Israel, Israel has a right to defend itself, but it is a qualified right. It has always been within international humanitarian law. And the scale of civilian loss of life, the children, the women who have lost their lives, the aid workers who have lost their lives, against a backdrop in which journalists are not allowed into the country, has been a matter of deep concern and worry across the international community. So, of course, I raised these issues. It was also important to meet with hostage families and to be absolutely clear, we want to see those hostages returned.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on your new appointment. I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that the escalation of violence can be reduced if we look at ending the suffering in Gaza. At a briefing I attended today with Oxfam and Medical Aid Palestine, they talked about how Israel were using water as a weapon of war. People have 4.7 litres of water per day to wash, clean and cook, and that is less than a toilet flush. So I welcome the position that we've taken. We've moved, greatly, but does my honourable friend agree with me that we need to go much further and much faster?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right. The issue of water, waterborne disease, we now have polio setting in, and of course we've had the famine because the lack of desalination is a very, very serious issue. That's why it was important to take the decision in the first days of office to restore aid to UNRWA, also to increase the amount of funds available to UK Med and to do more to open up field medical sites across Gaza. We will continue to press the aid issue in Gaza. I think it is important that the Rafah crossing is opened also, which would alleviate a lot of suffering.
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Foreign Secretary for your calls for de-escalation and a ceasefire, which of course should include the release of all hostages to ensure that we get more humanitarian aid in and a two-state solution. But of course we need to also look at the flow of arms, training and finances from the Iranian regime to the terror proxies of Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis, who are working tirelessly to ensure there isn't peace in the region. Foreign Secretary, do you agree that we should be helping Israel as much as we can to defend itself from these groups and their attacks?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. When you look at the scale of rocket fire and missiles and the damage that they are doing, when you think about these poor people away from their homes in northern Israel and boarded up now in hotels for months and months and months, it is important to have in clear view who is supporting these proxies and the arms and the weaponry that is driving a lot of conflict in the region, including by Hamas, by the way. And so for all of those reasons, we do keep sanctions under review.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today. And obviously, yet more deaths is a tragedy. Every mother and every father grieves for lost children, as do all relatives. But there is an issue here that unless the government and Israel and others accept the ICJ opinions and judgments about the illegal nature of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and of course the illegal nature of the occupation of the Golan Heights, then we're in danger of the conflict getting much worse. The UN Secretary General has called for restraint. Will the British government join him in doing that, but also join him in trying to convene some sort of regional peace initiative in order to prevent this whole thing escalating completely out of control? And finally, does the government reject the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman who I know has taken up these issues over many years in this Parliament. Let me be clear that what I saw and what I continue to see in the occupied territories is unacceptable. He will know that the community who experienced this violence in the Golan Heights are Druze in background, and this is occupation of the Golan Heights as well. I do recognise that. I want to see de-escalation across the board. I want to see a solution along the lines of Oslo and 1967. That is what we all want to get to, a two-state solution. And we will achieve that if we have an immediate ceasefire and we get back to political dialogue and conversation.
James Asser. No?
Oh, I'm going down for a question.
Thank you, thank you. Jim Shannon.
I always have a question. Sorry, I'm not. Humour's not what this is about, and I apologise for that. I shouldn't have said that. Can I just say that I can thank the Secretary of State very much for his calm and measured statement. It encapsulates, I believe, the temperament and the concern of all of this chamber from both sides, and I thank him for that. The attack at the football pitch in Majdal Shams is deadly and full of complete evil. 12 children and young adults were slaughtered. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps have been taken to find the perpetrators, make them accountable, and ensure that the message is sent that these attacks will not bring peace but instead bring further division? And what steps will be taken to assist Israel, whose very existence by Hezbollah is under threat? Hezbollah, of course, the terrorist murderers of innocents that they are, and that they must be neutralised. Thank you.
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he knows a lot about the issue of terrorism, and it's for that reason that he's used his position on the backbenches always to raise these issues. And he's absolutely right. There will be many people in our Jewish diaspora in this country looking with real fear about the prospect of escalation, worrying about their loved ones. We have updated the travel advice in relation to Israel, and particularly northern Israel as well at this time. And of course, we continue to work with our close ally in partnership in what is a very, very challenging moment.
And finally, Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Illegal Israeli settlements are imperiling the future viability of a Palestinian state, so they undermine the two-state solution. Would the Secretary of State consider issuing a statement that says that if Israel continues to expand illegal settlements, then the UK will immediately recognise the Palestinian state?
Foreign Secretary.
I recognise the huge concern that there is in this House and across the world with the nature both of the expansion and the violence. I've also said that recognition is important as a pathway to peace, and no country has a veto on when and how we do that working with partners. I don't think, however, that the proximity of the two is the right way to go about things diplomatically, and I suspect we would struggle to find other partners that would support us if we did that.
I'll now allow some time for the benches to clear before we start our next business.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I seek your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker? I wish to place on record my severe concerns about the government's failure to come formally before the House on their decision to impose VAT on independent schools. Not only have they imposed this policy through a written ministerial statement, but they have now also said that they will charge VAT on any fees that are paid in advance. And WMS is insufficient and purposely prevents the House from debating a policy that affects rural economies. I have 10 independent schools in my own constituency, but also military and SEN families, and both comprehensive and independent schools. How can she help us resolve this incredibly important issue for so many in the House?
The Honourable Lady has placed her concerns on the record, and I'm sure the Treasury bench will have heard them. The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Budget Responsibility Bill, second reading. Now.
Minister to move second reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate you and welcome you to your place in the chair and say what a privilege it is to open this debate on behalf of the government in my first appearance at this dispatch box as a minister in this new Labour government. At the general election, the British people voted for change. This new Labour government began work immediately to deliver on that mandate. Sustained growth is the only route to the improved prosperity that this country needs and to improve the living standards of the British people. After 14 years of Conservative failure, this work is urgent. It is now our national mission. To deliver on our mission, as my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has set out days after taking office, we must fix the foundations of the economy and restore economic stability. The Chancellor emphasised this commitment to deliver economic stability by meeting with the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, soon after becoming Chancellor. Under the legal framework we inherited from the party opposite, there is no requirement on the Treasury to subject fiscally significant announcements to independent OBR scrutiny. We all experienced what happens without this, when huge unfunded fiscal commitments are made without proper scrutiny and when key economic institutions like the OBR are sidelined. The country cannot afford a repeat of the calamitous mini-budget of September 2022, when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's reckless plans unleashed economic turmoil that has loaded hundreds of pounds onto people's mortgages and rents. Conservative ministers put ideology before sound public money, party before country. Madam Deputy Speaker, with this Labour government, we are turning the page. We will always put the country first, party second. Our commitment to fiscal discipline and sound money will never waver. That is why this government is firmly committed to the independence of the OBR and the important principle that in normal times, the announcement of a fiscally significant measure should always be accompanied by an independent assessment of the economic and fiscal implications to support transparency and accountability. And it is why we made a commitment in our manifesto to therefore strengthen the role of the OBR and why we have acted quickly to deliver on this commitment today. This action will reinforce credibility and trust by preventing large-scale unfunded commitments that are not subject to an independent fiscal assessment. As the chair of the OBR, Richard Hughes, has reiterated in his recent letter to the Chancellor, it is a good principle of fiscal policy making that major fiscal decisions should be based upon and presented alongside an up-to-date view of the economic and fiscal outlook. In line with this, yesterday, the Chancellor commissioned a full forecast to accompany our budget on the 30th of October, following the important principle that significant fiscal policy decisions should be made at a fiscal event and accompanied by an independent OBR assessment. This fiscal lock is an essential part of our mission to deliver economic stability. It is one of our first steps to fixing the foundations, and it is our guarantee to the British people that this Labour government is a responsible government which will never play fast and loose with the public finances and family finances as the Conservative Party has done before. I will now turn to how the bill will achieve this. The bill sets the legal framework for the operation of the fiscal lock. Its provisions build on the legislation that established the OBR, the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act of 2011. In line with this, the technical detail underpinning the fiscal lock will be set out via an upcoming update to the Charter for Budget Responsibility. The Charter sets out the government's fiscal framework, including guidance on how the OBR performs its duties within it. To support scrutiny of this bill during its passage through Parliament, the Treasury has published a draft of the relevant Charter text, which will make clear exactly how the government plans to implement the fiscal lock. A full update to the Charter will be published in due course, on which members of this House will vote in the usual way. The bill itself does 5 things to ensure that proper scrutiny of fiscal plans will be followed. First, the bill requires that before the government makes any fiscally significant announcement in Parliament, the Treasury always requests that the OBR presents an assessment taking this into account. This builds on the usual process whereby the Chancellor commissions the OBR for an economic and fiscal forecast to accompany a fiscal event. It guarantees in law that from now on, every fiscally significant change to tax and spending will be subject to scrutiny by the independent OBR. Second, it gives the OBR new powers to independently decide to produce an assessment if they judge that the fiscal lock has been triggered. If a fiscally significant announcement is made without the Treasury having previously requested a forecast from the OBR is required to inform the Treasury Select Committee of its opinion and then prepare an assessment as soon as is practicable. This means that, come what may, the OBR through Parliament will be able to hold the government to account. Third, the bill defines a measure or combination of measures as fiscally significant if they exceed a specified percentage of GDP, with the Charter then setting the precise threshold itself. Setting the threshold in this way provides clarity for both the OBR and external stakeholders about what constitutes a fiscally significant announcement, i.e. when the fiscal lock has been triggered. And it ensures that the government can set it at the right level going forward, recognising economic conditions. The threshold level itself will be set at announcements of at least 1% of nominal GDP in the latest OBR forecast. As an example, this year, the 1% threshold would be £28 billion. This will ensure that we properly capture any announcements that resemble the growth plan of former members Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in 2022, with the broader risks to macroeconomic stability that this entailed. Fourth, the bill ensures that the fiscal lock does not apply to governments responding to emergencies, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. The bill does this by not applying in respect of measures that are intended to have a temporary effect and which are in response to an emergency. The Charter will define temporary as any measure that is intended to end within 2 years. This recognises that it is sometimes reasonable, for example during a pandemic, for the government to act quickly and decisively without an OBR assessment if that is needed in response to a shock. Of course, in emergencies it may be appropriate for the Chancellor to commission a forecast from the OBR to follow measures that needed to be announced or implemented rapidly, and that would happen in the usual way. Alongside any such announcement, the Treasury will be required to make clear why it considers the situation to be an emergency. As set out in the updated Charter, the OBR will have the discretion to trigger the fiscal lock and prepare a report if it reasonably disagrees. Fifth and finally, the bill requires the government to publish any updates to the detail of the fiscal lock, such as the threshold level at which it is triggered, in draft form at least 28 days before the updated Charter is laid before Parliament. This is an essential safeguard in the bill, preventing any future government from choosing to ignore the fiscal lock by updating the Charter without the consent of Parliament. I shall.
And the Minister is setting the stark realities of where we are financially. It's important that we all understand that. I just wonder, has the Minister had the opportunity when these things could be fairly dramatically change the financial positions of us all within the United Kingdom? For instance, regionally, the Northern Ireland Assembly is one example, the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Parliament. I think it really be important that those discussions take place with them early enough so that the impacts of what could happen or might happen would be better understood.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his contribution. As I'm sure he knows, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury is traditionally the lead minister in government for relationships with the finance ministers and the devolved governments. I've already met a number of times with his counterparts in the Northern Ireland Executive, as well as theirs in Scotland and Wales, and I look forward to meeting them in person in Northern Ireland, I hope in September, for further such discussions. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, people across the country are still suffering the consequences of the Conservative Party's economic experiment in 2022. Conservative ministers took the most reckless decisions without any thought for their real-life impact on the British economy and on family finances. Astonishingly, they have still made no apology. With this Labour government, our commitment to fiscal discipline and sound money is the bedrock of our plans. So, the Budget Responsibility Bill guarantees in law that from now on, every fiscally significant change to tax and spending will be subject to scrutiny by the independent OBR. The bill will reinforce credibility and trust by preventing large-scale unfunded commitments that are not subject to the scrutiny of an OBR fiscal assessment. This delivers on a key manifesto commitment to provide economic stability and sound public finances by strengthening the role of the independent OBR. This is a crucial first step to fixing the foundations in our economy so that we can achieve sustained economic growth and make every part of the country better off. And for those reasons, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call Opposition Spokesperson Gareth Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, congratulations on your election to the chair. And Madam Deputy Speaker, let me take this as my first opportunity to congratulate the Honourable and Right Honourable gentleman opposite, the new Treasury ministerial team. They've taken up some of the best jobs in government. I loved every minute of my time in the Treasury, even when I had to come to this place to face my shadows. and I will always be grateful to the officials who supported me and the team so ably. And as the Member of Parliament for Grantham, the home of our country's first female Prime Minister, I congratulate our country's first female Chancellor. It is right that we highlight that. While the two are not politically aligned, we can all recognise when a ceiling has been shattered, and no matter who is breaking it, and we certainly recognise that on this side of the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill before us today seeks to amend the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act of 2011, a bill introduced by a Conservative Chancellor and which created the Office for Budget Responsibility. The bill should be understood in that context, building on a previous bill which replaced a system where His Majesty's Treasury would produce its own forecasts and the Chancellor of the Exchequer would essentially mark their own homework. Back then, this was an essential piece of legislation, given what had gone on before. Between 2000 and 2010, the then Labour government their so-called forecasts for growth in the economy were out by an average of £13 billion. Their forecasts for the budget deficit 3 years ahead were out by an average £40 billion. Their forecasts therefore lacked any credibility at all. And it wasn't just the forecasts which led to the creation of the OBR, it was the management of the economy. Much has already been said by the Shadow Chancellor about higher inflation, higher deficit and higher unemployment the Conservatives inherited from Labour in 2010. But what is sometimes forgotten is that total public spending accounted for almost half of the national income when Labour last left office. Welfare spending ballooned by a staggering 45%, and this runaway spending meant that we inherited the largest budget deficit of any economy in Europe, with the sole exception of one country, and that was Ireland. And so the idea, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Labour have an unblemished record when it comes to the public finances is just plain wrong. We Conservatives created the OBR, in part to guard against Labour's fiscal unaccountability and recklessness with the public finances. We continue to support the role of the OBR in providing open, fully transparent, independent forecasts for all to see, no matter who is in government. And what was good to hear, genuinely good to hear, was the Chancellor recognised the importance of the OBR when she said that because of the OBR, in her words, you don't need to win an election to find out the state of the public finances. She was absolutely right about that. That's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, yesterday's supposed revelations just simply won't wash. In fact, she's so supportive of the OBR. If she is so supportive of the OBR, I ask a simple question. Why was yesterday's statement based on Treasury analysis and not OBR analysis? Surely if they're very supportive of the OBR, they would have asked the OBR to conduct that analysis, not internal Treasury analysis. The OBR have always said that they would be ready to produce analysis any time on short notice. But Madam Deputy Speaker, look, that was yesterday. And today we're here to talk about the bill in front of us right now. While we're supportive of the OBR, we think it is right that the House needs to consider a number of concerns we have that we'll be seeking clarification from the government on. Firstly, the bill will require the Treasury to request and the OBR to produce a report on fiscally significant measures announced by the government, with the exception of temporary emergency measures. The definitions of these terms, fiscally significant, temporary, and emergency, will be set out in the Charter for Budget Responsibility, as the Chief Secretary outlined. The draft Charter text, published alongside this bill, deems measures to be fiscally significant if they cost the equivalent of 1% of GDP in any financial year. It defines as temporary any measure intended to end within 2 years. And the draft Charter text gives the OBR discretion to reasonably disagree with the Treasury's interpretation of what constitutes emergency. Given some of the rhetoric around this bill, we note that nowhere in this bill, or the surrounding documents, is the OBR actually empowered to prevent a government from taking fiscally significant action of any kind. The effect of this bill is to ensure that an OBR costing accompanies any fiscal significant action a government takes, nothing more, nothing less. Some of the way the Chancellor described this bill as being a so-called lock to prevent certain activity is, if I was being generous on my first outing, overly ambitious. The bill is described as introducing a fiscal lock which the Chancellor promises will prevent large-scale unfunded commitments. It's just not what this bill does, though. There is no fiscal lock. If anything, it's a forecast lock. The potential impact of this bill is limited, so limited, actually, so specific as to leave some to wonder whether, for all the animated hyperbole of the Chancellor yesterday, this is prioritisation of gimmicks over governing, despite what the Prime Minister said at the King's speech. I will in a moment. Secondly, and as I say this, I say it genuinely constructively, the government needs to be better prepared to clarify what is meant by emergency. The draft charter gives the OBR the power to reasonably disagree with the government's interpretation of what is or not an emergency. But this raises questions around whether the OBR is equipped in the first place to make such a decision. What counts as an emergency should mostly be clear-cut. But what about instances that are less obvious, unforeseen circumstances that will come down the track? The OBR would then be straying into political decision-making, which would rightly raise constitutional issues. Even if, ultimately, it is for ministers to decide on such matters, any resulting disagreement between the government and the OBR on whether the circumstances amount to emergency could undermine the credibility of the government, the OBR, or both. Thirdly and finally, in the event the lock is...
I thank the Minister for giving way because I'm genuinely perplexed. I can't understand whether the Shadow Minister is with his former colleague, the South West Norfolk member who wanted to see the OBR abolished and not part of any of our decision making, or doesn't feel that this piece of legislation goes far enough. Either way, does he recognise and accept, as thousands of mortgage payers in this country now do, the disaster of the previous Conservative Prime Minister's budget and the impact it's had and the need never to go back to those days?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we support the OBR. I've been clear on that. We created the OBR. So to suggest that we don't support the OBR is incorrect. But I would just pull her up on some economic facts. The reason interest rates were so high and mortgages went up is because we faced a global challenge which this government will now experience. In office, you have to deal with events. And what caused inflation around the world was two things. It was the war in Ukraine, which pushed up gas prices. Wholesale gas prices reached record highs. And secondly, the fallout from the pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic, which the party opposite seem to have forgotten about. And so those two factors resulted in 11% inflation, which resulted in my, at the time, Chancellor and Prime Minister prioritising bringing down inflation, which we did, to 2%. And we've now handed this government 2% inflation, half the deficit we inherited in 2010, half the unemployment, and the fastest growth in the G7. So the suggestion that we need to take lessons from the party opposite on economic performance, I think, is a little rich. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, a third and final concern that we have, and we have others, but I'm keeping it short, given its second reading. In the event the lock is triggered, the OBR does not need to produce one of its standard reports, even though the Treasury, under this bill, is required to request such a report to avoid breaking the lock. The bill, therefore, creates the possibility of an entirely new OBR report, which is not envisaged by the original Act. And I'd be grateful to the Minister if he could explain this and what it actually means in practice when he sums up this debate. While standard OBR reports must be published, it is not clear whether this applies to other reports the OBR may prepare. If this requirement does not apply, is the government happy to give the OBR the power to decide whether or not its costings are published? This is potentially very concerning when it comes to transparency. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the official opposition look forward to more detailed scrutiny of this bill and the practical implications of it. But be in no doubt, we support the OBR. We created it to bring in much needed transparency to our fiscal framework after years of fiscal folly and false promises by the Labour Party. But at the same time, let us not pretend that the OBR should be the ultimate judge of good policy, that nothing bad can happen under its watchful eye and nothing good can happen beyond its gaze. Labour knows this. It's precisely what they argued 15 years ago when we first debated this bill that led to the OBR's creation. Nor should it become too political. The OBR should be a referee, not a player, in the fight for fiscal accountability. In the end, we stand by the principle that the British people, through their elected representatives, should always have the deciding say on public policy. We look forward to debating this further in the months ahead. We will not be voting against this bill at second reading, and we look forward to the debate.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I feel like I'm almost in Alice in Wonderland's world when it comes to listening to the opposition benches responding to this piece of legislation. I certainly feel concerned that they may have been with the Cheshire Cat and possibly following the Queen of Hearts, trying to pretend that their previous Conservative Prime Minister didn't exist, or indeed that the member for Spelthorne was never ever the Chancellor. Those of us, and I declare a direct conflict of interest, paying a mortgage know all too well how they were in charge and the damage that they did with their disastrous mini-budget, and so why this piece of legislation is so important. And I'll wager that their constituents can tell them too, if they wish to try to suggest that the economic harm that the previous government did to this country and that we will all be paying for generations to come was solely to do with Ukraine or indeed the pandemic. That mini-budget was a political choice. But worse than that, it was a politically uninformed choice because the government at the time consciously and purposefully made the decision on ideological grounds to press ahead with a budget that cost 1% of our GDP, and to hell with the consequences, as we have all seen. That is why this legislation is so important. Now, I am pleased, I will always welcome a sinner repenteth, Madam Deputy Speaker, a shadow spokesperson who recognises the value of independent scrutiny and indeed urges us all to go further. We will always welcome that approach because it is right, because our constituents do deserve better, because we can see how bad things are and how broken this country is. And what this bill has at the heart of it is what funds there are to repair the damage that was done by the previous administration. That is why the spokesperson for the government minister, my mind has gone, it's the end of term, the Chancellor is here today with this piece of legislation to be clear with us about why it matters and why we put things on the books and we have sound money at our heart, because the markets didn't react by accident and put up all our mortgages. They saw with terror the damage that bad leadership can do in the Treasury and have asked us accordingly to meet that challenge. And frankly, there is nothing progressive about crashing the economy, and that's exactly what the previous government did. Now, by putting on the record the need to report independently on fiscally significant measures, we are starting with a clean sheet to say that we will not take such a reckless approach with other people's money, because at the end of the day, that's what this is. The tax revenues that are generated are the monies of our constituents, and therefore it is right that we are careful about how we administer them. But I also recognise in this piece of legislation there are challenges, and in the contribution I want to make today, I hope to hear from the ministers on the front bench further clarity about this concept of fiscally significant. As somebody who's always liked to be hawkish about public money, I think it is important that we are clear where we are investing, and I very much urge the Treasury to think about investing to save. I see that in our broken society. I see the damage that is done by poverty, by poor public services and the higher costs that come. So I want us to be clear about the funding that we have and where that is coming from and why every penny matters. I will always give way to the members.
I'm very grateful. As she knows, the new government have intimated that they may decide to mirror much new EU legislation, which could well have budgetary consequences. On Europe, she and I have not quite always seen eye to eye, but would she agree with me that in that context it's actually a bad mistake to to do what the government want to do tonight and to abolish the European Scrutiny Committee?
He preempts many of my own concerns that there is a very strong story to tell about good fiscal discipline, that it is not possible to do that independently in a modern global economy, and therefore it does matter the scrutiny that we're able to provide in this place about a whole range of regulations, and those do include financial regulations. I think particularly about the city, I think particularly about issues around a financial tax, for example, and I know there are many across this House. He and I, he's right, I haven't yet convinced him of the merits. I'm confident that one day we can, of working more closely with Europe, but I do agree with him that that should be a matter for this House to be fully part of. Just as I believe in the principles behind this piece of legislation, that disinfected comes from transparency and it comes from our ability to see what is going on. And that's why I think it is so right that this government has brought this legislation forward. But let me move on to some of those areas where I think it is right that we ask what we mean by fiscally significant. Because he and I might disagree about what deal we do in resetting our relationship with Europe, but there can be no doubt it will have a very clear economic impact on this country. I think right now of the hauliers considering whether they will give up bringing goods to the UK at all because of the Brexit border tax, a measure that the previous government admitted was inflationary, that could have a substantial impact not just on our food security, but on our economy, on pushing up the cost of living, that many of our constituents know that there is still too much month at the end of their money. And any measure, to my mind, which makes that harder is something that we should challenge. Well, that will also reflect our tax take. The point that I'm getting to is if we're talking about measures that are so fiscally significant that they account for 1% of GDP, well, a trade deal would easily meet that criteria. So we need to be clear in this legislation, clear what we ask of the Office of Budget Responsibility, who after all have provided previous evidence on the impact, for example, of leaving the European Union, whether we consider their role in such matters. If we are going to put everything on the book, let's make sure that the public understand fully the decisions that we're making and where that information is coming from. Another area where I feel that as a House we need to act, especially if we're being asked to make very difficult choices about some of the most vulnerable in our communities, those people who rely, for example, on welfare, those pensioners who might rely on the winter fuel payment, is around our outgoings. Because we have to be honest, this country is pretty much bankrupt as a result of the previous administration. And if somebody in that dire financial position came into our surgeries, we would sit with them and we would talk about a debt relief order. We would look at their costs. We would look particularly at consolidating the debts that they may have. Many of my colleagues here will know that for many years I have been concerned about legal loan sharking. Well, that's not just within people's private lives, it's within the public sector as well. And I consider the Private Finance Initiative to be the legal loan sharks of the public sector. If we are talking about fiscally significant measures, measures that meet that test of £28 billion, well, we have £151 billion of outgoings committed to private finance companies in this country against £57 billion worth of assets. Most people can see those figures do not add up. Local authorities spend around £18 billion every 2 to 5 years on PFI repayments, of which about £4 billion is interest costs. That would suggest an average interest rate of around 35%. If somebody came into your surgery with a loan at a 35% interest rate, you would be encouraging them to go to a debt relief order. Our country is no different. And it matters because individually local authorities might not meet that fiscally significant threshold, but collectively they will for us. Because we're not going to let hospitals and schools go bust, go out of business. Indeed, Parklands High School in Liverpool was built under PFI. It was closed because there wasn't a demand for the places, but Liverpool City Council are still paying £12,000 a day for that closed school. They have £42 million left to pay in repayments, and the company that owns it is making a profit of around £340,000 a day from that scheme. Private finance companies are on our books, and they should be on our books nationally. They should be considered a fiscally significant measure because there are things that we can do to consolidate those loans and to reduce the outgoings that will come. So in my contribution to this bill and in the amendments that I may table, depending on what the ministers say, I think we need to be clear that everything that is fiscally significant, both decisions that we may not proceed with and decisions that we do proceed with, should be subject to that level of scrutiny. The National Audit Office has already given us plenty of information about the poor value for money of private finance initiatives. And many people here who have these schools and hospitals in their constituencies will have seen it firsthand. There is evidence from the Department of Health about what could be done to consolidate those loans that probably would generate some of those savings that would be fiscally significant when we're talking about the sums involved. It would be fantastic to see the Office of Budget Responsibility pick this up as part of us knowing just how much we have to pay out as a country, just how much of a contribution we need to make. And this is going to private companies who are not paying tax in this country on the whole, so it is not generating revenue that can go back into paying for the repairs that need to come. The previous government started to look at these issues and then walked away. I know this government, with its commitment to fiscal discipline and fiscal transparency, will want to be open about the benefits and costs and the fiscal significance both of those trade deals that we might make and indeed of private finance initiatives. And I look forward to hearing from the ministers on the front bench about that. It is a very different world. The Shadow Minister is smiling. I'm sure that he misses his colleague from Spelthorne, but I know he will not miss the opportunity to say sorry to all of our constituents for the mess that we have been left in, for the reason why we now need this legislation and the discipline of the Office of Budget Responsibility, and for the failure to tackle those long-term problems that have left legal loan sharks and poor trading opportunities for our constituents, because they are going to pick up the pieces for generations to come.
I now call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. Congratulations on your election. The Liberal Democrats understand the importance of a stable economy to the well-being of our nation, and we will support this bill as it makes its way through Parliament. We have seen the effects of the chaos and uncertainty wrought by the previous Conservative government in their horrendous mismanagement of the economy, and we know that future prosperity can only be built upon a firm foundation. The former member for South West Norfolk may have intervened to prevent officials from using the phrase disastrous mini-budget in the King's Speech document. However, this was a disaster for which many millions across the country continue to pay the price. Liberal Democrat MPs have been returned to this House in greater numbers than ever before because we understand how much our constituents have suffered from the increase in mortgage payments, higher fuel bills and escalating food prices that resulted from the disastrous mini-budget. We will do all we can to tackle the cost of living crisis being felt by so many, and we welcome the new government's commitment to building a strong platform for economic growth. We welcome this bill as a signal of strengthened fiscal responsibility and transparency, which we hope will prevent a repeat of the Conservatives' disastrous mini-budget under Liz Truss from ever happening again. And after the turmoil of the outgoing Conservative government, we welcome the seriousness of intent of this government as it rebuilds trust with the financial markets and the business and financial sector as a whole. The financial irresponsibility and unfunded tax cuts seen in the mini-budget sent mortgage rates soaring and continued a pattern of low growth, falling living standards and business uncertainty under the Conservatives. Millions of people across the country continue to see the devastating impact of this disastrous governance in their food and energy bills and feel its heavy burden in their own personal finances. A recent report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies shows that 320,000 people have been pushed into poverty because of mortgage interest rate rises caused by the incompetence of the previous Conservative government. It has been devastating to hear the stories of so many households dragged into poverty and to know that so many families are struggling under the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. And it is painful to reflect upon the thousands of people who were hoping to make progress in their lives and improve the circumstances of their families, but find themselves pulled backwards by the weight of the costs now piled upon them. The IFS report tells us that the number of adults unable to keep their homes warm enough increased from 1.8 million in 2020 to 4.6 million in 2023, and they attribute that increase to the rise in mortgage interest rates during that period. This statistic lays bare in shaming detail the enormous and ongoing impact that the Conservatives' disastrous mini-budget has had on all of our lives. The broad positive responses that this bill has evoked across the business and finance sector are indicative of the desire for industry stability, and we welcome the engagement from economists and industry experts who advise the beneficial impact of this bill on confidence in public finances. Indeed, even the former Chancellor himself has acknowledged that he is minded to support it. We will carefully scrutinise the details of the bill to make sure it will achieve its intended aims. In particular, we will look closely at the threshold for fiscally significant measures set out in this legislation as measures worth at least 1% of GDP or approximately 30 billion, and whether this regulation could be circumvented by governments announcing major changes just below the threshold. The proposed terms had a substantial threshold before the OBR could insist on intervening, raising questions over how easy it would be for a government to skirt the rules and avoid scrutiny from the watchdog. While we understand that the bar has been set relatively high in order to prevent a large-scale, irresponsible fiscal event, such as the disastrous mini-budget, we are aware of the limitations that this places on the bill. In particular, with regards to announcements which would have largely indirect fiscal events because of their impact on the economy, but small upfront costs to the government and therefore wouldn't trigger the fiscal lock. We ask the Chancellor whether a GDP measure alone can adequately capture the impact of a spending or taxation measure on the economy, and whether the government should examine the possibility of using additional criteria in establishing the threshold. And we must consider the wider context within which the Conservatives' damaging mini-budget came about, to determine whether the proposed measure we are debating today would be sufficient in itself to stop such a disaster from ever happening again. The Conservatives' period in government, during the last two parliaments in particular, was characterised by a distaste for the institutions that provide checks and balances to power, accompanied by efforts to actively undermine them. Throughout the course of the last few years, we've seen attacks on the judiciary, the civil service, on the BBC, on the Bank of England, on the EU, and on any British citizen who dared to express the view that the government's botched Brexit deal was doing enormous damage to our economy. We have seen the provisions of international treaties be airily discarded. Conservative ministers even illegally prorogue Parliament. Even now, in the Conservative Party leadership contest, it seems the one thing all candidates agree on is promising that the UK should leave the European Court of Human Rights. The disastrous mini-budget emerged from a philosophy that the power of the central government, exercised by successive Conservative prime ministers, can trump other vital independent institutions. And it's precisely this philosophy that we must never see from government again. The ongoing failure of the former Member of Parliament for South West Norfolk to apologise for the disastrous mini-budget underlines the fact that she thinks she was both entitled and correct to unleash it onto an unsuspecting country that voted neither for it nor for her. To truly address the causes of the systemic failure that led to the disastrous mini-budget will take a great deal more than just this bill. It requires the government to work alongside the institutions that exist to both support and challenge its decision-making. It requires the government to submit its proposed measures to parliamentary scrutiny. Liberal Democrats think that reforms devolving power to local bodies to decentralise decision-making would also strengthen our ability to take long-term decisions in the national interest. This bill and other measures are encouraging signs of this new government's intention to ensure that those in power will act with more integrity and transparency. But ultimately, unless all governments are themselves committed to upholding the principles of fiscal responsibility, transparency and sound governance, the risk of future disasters like the mini-budget will remain. In our general election manifesto, we set out the need for every fiscal event to be accompanied by an independent forecast from the OBR. More broadly, we wish to see the government foster stability, certainty and confidence by managing the public finances responsibly, getting the national debt falling as a share of the economy and ensuring that day-to-day spending does not exceed the amount raised in taxes. And we must make the tax system itself fairer by asking some of the wealthiest companies in the world to pay their fair share, the big banks, the oil and gas producers, the tech giants, instead of adding even more to the burden on hard-working families. To improve stability and growth, we need to fix our broken trading relationship with Europe and set up an industrial strategy, helping to make Britain one of the most attractive places in the world for businesses to invest. We must work in partnership with responsible, sustainable businesses to tackle the climate emergency and spur the growth needed to invest in health, social care, education and other essential public services. Responsible public finances are essential for the stability, certainty and confidence that drive economic growth, and they are vital in getting mortgage rates under control too. Under the outgoing Conservative government, we found out just how much pain and damage can come from fiscal irresponsibility. Liberal Democrats want to see a thriving British economy that provides jobs and opportunities for people and is attractive to businesses and investors. We welcome this bill as a useful step in that direction, helping to improve long-term stability and responsible economic management. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Does the point of order relate to the business being discussed right now?
Business of the day, yes, Madam Deputy.
Yeah. Just for reference, I know for new MPs it can be tricky, but points of order must be relevant to the business or be made during transition between items of business. But I know as a new MP that isn't easy, and I'm grateful for the member for giving notice of this point of order, so proceed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're hearing a lot about transparency, accountability and scrutiny. But the reality is, on the business of the day, proposed by the Leader of the House, is the plan to abolish the European Scrutiny Committee. Now, when this country voted to leave the European Union, we voted to take back control. How, Madam Deputy Speaker, can we scrutinise the activities and negotiations of this government with the European Union if the government abolishes the European Scrutiny Committee? Surely it's completely in contrast to what the government has proposed in its manifesto and all of these discussions about scrutiny.
I'm grateful for the member giving us notice of his points of order. It is for the government to decide what orders should be tabled and whether there should be consultation. Any select committee can scrutinise matters within its remit, which may include matters relating to the European Union. The remit of the European Scrutiny Committee is to examine European Union documents as defined in Standing Order number 143. Broadly speaking, there are proposals for European Union legislation or policy. It is for the House to decide whether the committee still fulfils a useful function now that the UK is no longer a member of the EU, not for the Speaker. Thank you. I now call Martin Rhodes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for calling me to make my maiden speech during this debate. I moved to Glasgow in 1992, expecting to stay for 3 years. And now, over 3 decades later, I'm very pleased to have made it my home. And for those more than 30 years, I've lived in the north of the city. It is therefore a great privilege and a great responsibility to have been elected to serve the constituency of Glasgow North. It is a constituency of huge variety and diversity. At its northern boundary, farmland north of Somerston, and at its southern boundary are the River Clyde, the Scottish Event Campus, the Hydro Venue, and the city centre. From the west of Scotland's Science Park at its western boundary to the Glasgow Tigers Speedway track toward the eastern boundary. And of course, a lot more in between. Firhill, the home of Partick Thistle, the Kelvin Grove Art Galleries, Postle Marsh, a site of special scientific interest, Glasgow Caledonian University and the University of Glasgow, the School of Art and the Royal Conservatoire, the Queen's Cross Church of Charles William Mackintosh, the Forth and Clyde Canal, the River Kelvin, Rockhill, Maryhill and Dossone Parks, as well as Kelvin Grove Park and the Botanic Gardens. But most of all, far more important than these key landmarks, are the communities that make up Glasgow North, many of which have faced and still face significant challenges and have sought to do what they can to support each other in the face of those challenges. Resilience is a thread that runs through the diverse communities of Glasgow North. It is an area that I'm pleased to call home and am now privileged to represent in this place. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to recognise the work of my predecessor as the member for Glasgow North, Patrick Grady. In his time here, he was chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Malawi and has a long interest in development issues, an interest I'm sure he will continue to pursue outside this place. The boundaries of the constituency are different to those of Glasgow North in previous parliaments and includes parts of the city that were previously in Glasgow North East and Glasgow Central. I know that my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North East, in her first speech, will want to recognise the former member for Glasgow North East, Anne McLaughlin. So with no disrespect to her, I will keep my comments to the former member for Glasgow Central, Alison Thewlis. As Glasgow Central no longer exists, I want to ensure that we do not as a House miss the opportunity to recognise the commitment and work of the former member for Glasgow Central. In her time in this place, and before that as a city councillor in Glasgow, she showed her commitment to serving those she represented. There is one other former member for Glasgow North who would like to pay tribute to today, Anne McKechnie. She served in this place from 2001 to 2015. She has been a friend and a giver of wise advice for many years. And her time in this place and outside shows her continuing commitment to public service. All of us here want to ensure that we represent the people that we are elected to represent. And we also recognise across this chamber the aspiration to serve of all members. But we also need to ensure that mutual recognition of this service does not blind us to the challenges that face politics and public service. A number of events not too long ago have added to and encouraged a distrust, not just of politicians, but of politics itself. The turnout in my own constituency at the general election was just over 50%, and across the country, only around 60%. There are many reasons for this. Certainly, in some constituencies such as mine, the large amount of student accommodation lying empty because of the summer break counted towards lower turnout. And across Scotland, holding an election at the start of the school holidays may have reduced turnout too. But we should not let these contributory factors hide the clear opinion of many that politics is a self-serving occupation to which they demonstrate their indifference, distrust and disdain by not using their vote. For too long, government and politics has too often allowed itself to be characterised by posturing and positioning, rather than the serious work of analysing problems, assessing potential solutions, and then delivering change. The empty charade of superficial posturing can initially seem to excite and engage, but the lack of substance, the lack of delivery, and the lack of integrity can so easily tip the balance from excitement to disillusionment and a sense of betrayal. Thorough analysis, serious discussion, and honest decision-making has to be the basis of politics. If we are to rebuild trust, financial responsibility and transparency being a key part of that. It is our challenge across the chamber over the course of this Parliament to rebuild trust in political institutions and processes. We need to show to people out there that politics is acting in their service, and we need to show that politics can make real and positive changes to their lives and communities. That is a challenge to all of us. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the challenge that I hope that I can meet as I try to do so over the course of my time in this place.
Yeah. Dave Dugan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to follow the honourable member for Glasgow North, who's just delivered a textbook maiden speech. In so doing, he negotiated his way around the sort of fairly awkward changes to the Glasgow constituencies and played, I think, judging by the reactions within the chamber, a unanimous salute to two former servants of their constituency, whom he now serves, and also hard-working representatives within this chamber. And I think if I could reciprocate, he also mentioned former Labour Minister in the Scotland office, I seem to recall at the time, Anne McKechnie, who invited me to her constituency office in Glasgow when I was a mature student around about 2010-11, and gave me a good hour of her time, which at the time I thought, well, that was fairly generous. As an MP, I realise now just how generous that was to do for somebody who was not your constituent and who within about 2 or 3 minutes clearly demonstrated signs of a particularly different political outlook. So congratulations to the honourable member. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Budget Responsibility Bill and commend the Government for bringing it forward. I'm not certain it is what they say it is, and I'll develop that in a wee moment. But who amongst us can forget the aftermath of the Truss Kwarteng debacle, plunging businesses and households across these islands into chaos, while then the pair of them disappearing off into the sunset, leaving us here to pick up the pieces of the arrogant and economically illiterate fiscal experiment while in government. And if anyone has forgotten, then they aren't the mortgage payers up and down these islands who are still paying the price of that particular Tory government misadventure. Mortgage rates spiked at 6% after the mini-budget, and figures out last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, from Moneyfacts show that the average rate for a 2-year fixed deal is still 5.79
We in the SNP warned at the time that the mini-budget approach would lead to economic chaos. Therefore, the SNP can only be supportive of these measures included in the bill to help try and ensure that there is never a repeat of that ridiculous performance. So, an independent assessment by the OBR for major and permanent fiscal interventions is welcome. It's responsible, we support it, but to be clear, it is no silver bullet. It won't fix the economy, and nor will it prevent fiscal incompetence from the current or future Chancellor or their officials or junior ministers. It won't fix the credibility of Chancellors who, for example, upon taking office, say they didn't know about the £20 billion black hole in the previous government's fiscal plan which they were adopting, even though they were warned about it repeatedly and in public by the SNP, by the IFS and others. So the SNP welcome efforts at increasing economic transparency, but the truth is that Labour have also been substantially short of honest with the public in this area. The new government is seeking to create a counter-narrative, a counter-reality to uphold the belief that the cuts and tax hikes which Labour will soon visit upon businesses and communities across these islands have been done to Labour by the Tories rather than done to the people by Labour. And that is the truth of the matter. If Labour are serious about restoring faith and growth of the economy, then much more action is needed from the government than this. No economy ever cut its way to growth, but rather growth being a function of investment. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I greatly fear this new Labour government is getting a bit carried away with its own success and sailing off from reality at some knots. I cite the nauseating government of service hyperbole, the Potemkin energy company that is GB Energy, which is abject nonsense, and now this fiscal lock, which is set out in the bill. An assessment by the OBR is not a lock on anything, Madam Deputy Speaker. It does not enable, nor does it prevent anything. It does not confine, nor does it decide anything. And Parliament will never allow it to be used as a shield for the Chancellor. From its beginning to its end, it is simply an impartial assessment, leaving the hands of the Chancellor of the day free to prosecute whatever plan they wish, consistent with the OBR's assessment or not. And so it should be, because Parliament is here to hold the government to account, and the people across these islands, which I think we just saw. And it's certainly no, to be clear, it's certainly no replacement for rigorous parliamentary scrutiny of fiscal policy. It's a core function of this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, which I'm sure you will agree with. So in the interests of consensus, would the Minister concede this minor point of detail that fiscal report is far more realistic in terms of what it actually means than fiscal lock for this nevertheless welcome measure?
Maiden speech, Blair McDougall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as I'm being welcomed to my place, can I welcome you to your place and congratulate you? Can I also congratulate the member for Glasgow North. He spoke about the lack of trust in politics, and I think an eloquent speech like that and the service he will give to his community will go a long way to help repair that. And can I say how wonderful it is to see you as one of many, to see the Honourable Gentleman rather, as one of many Labour MPs from that great city. Can I say to the member for Angus and Perthshire Glens that I don't wish to nauseate him, but my speech is going to be about public duty. So apologies for that. Yesterday evening, after the statement by the Chancellor and the discussion afterwards about responsibility and duty and about the legacy that people leave within this chamber, I was standing on the banks of the river, watching the river go by, as it has done for countless generations. And I thought of everyone who had stood on those banks before, about the choices they had made, the decisions they'd made, and how those choices had impacted on the lives of everyone who followed them. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the first and most important duty, and the duty that this bill seeks to enshrine, is taking responsible decisions that will ensure a richer life for those who follow us, for our children and our grandchildren. And the failure of our age is that we departed from that purpose. We have departed from that purpose, and in doing so have left people trapped in short-term lives. Lives without the opportunity to learn for the future, lives without a permanent home, lives of short-term precarious work. A generation has been handed down falling life expectancy, a poisoned environment, and a legacy of debt. Now, time and generations flow, and they can change for the better or for the worse. And that changes as a result of political decisions, and it also happens as a result of personal decisions. And I'll talk about that aspect a little later in my speech. But the hard decisions that we make today are what create a better tomorrow. And as political leaders, for me, this bill is about us taking the kind of decisions that my constituents make every single day. And passing this bill will be a promissory note that this new Parliament will do better, and that this new Labour government will reclaim the legacy and the future of an abandoned generation. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the story of intergenerational opportunity is the story of my constituency of East Renfrewshire. And I'm going to be very brave, and I'm not going to claim that my constituency is the most beautiful constituency. Partly because over the last couple of weeks listening to other honourable members, I'm quite happy for that title to rest until the next Maiden speakers perhaps stand up. And you certainly can find natural beauty in East Renfrewshire if you walk through Greenbank Gardens, or you stroll through Rooken Glen, or you take a hike up the top of the Neilston Pad. But the extraordinary thing about my constituency isn't the place, it's the people. Because generation after generation have moved to East Renfrewshire because it offers hope for the next generation and a better life for their children. First they came for the mills, the works and the quarries. They came to Neilston, to Busby, to Giffnock and to Thornley Bank. In Barrhead they came in great numbers for a job at the old Shanks Works, making the toilets for the Titanic, for royalty, and also, Madam Deputy Speaker, the toilets for this place. I must admit there is some jealousy for me when I hear other honourable members talk about the pride they feel when Mr Speaker has chosen whisky that members sip on, or the shortbread for the canteen that members snack on, or the member for Inverclyde in West Renfrewshire talking about the seats that we sit on coming from his constituency. I don't want to think about what honourable members do on my constituency's most significant product, but I hope the relief it provides enhances the quality of debate in the chamber. But those industrial workers were followed south out of Glasgow by the Irish and the Jewish communities, then by Muslim families, and in turn by Hindus and Sikhs. And more recently, we've been joined by Ukrainians and Hong Kongers who are not just looking for opportunity, but looking for liberty. Because East Renfrewshire is somewhere where people aspire to live. Parents sacrifice and strive to make the dream of living there real, driven on by the love of their families. Because in East Renfrewshire, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have extraordinary schools, the best schools in Scotland, with remarkable teachers who open wide the future for our children. And I want to make special mention of the remarkable Isabel Mayer School, where every child with additional special needs is valued and celebrated. But sacrificing and striving for the next generation doesn't stop at the school gates in my constituency. It goes far beyond that. Volunteers at Nelly Boxes, the Include Me Too Club, or the Back to School Bank work to ensure that disadvantage or disability are no barriers to a childhood of opportunity, discovery and fun. St Cadoc's football team is typical of the sports clubs who offer our kids the confidence and camaraderie that comes with competition. Started in 1987 by the school Janny, it now has thousands of kids playing football. But I could have just as easily told the story of Giffnock Soccer Centre, Barrhead Youth Football Club, Neilston Wasps, GHA or Whitecraigs Rugby Club, or East Wren Cricket Club. I could go on, and as it's my maiden speech, I will. Harlequin Youth Theatre gives kids the thrill of performance, and our flourishing Girl Guides, Scouts, Boys and Girls Brigade and our Maccabee offer young people adventure and a taste of leadership. East Renfrewshire is, to borrow a phrase from something else, a constituency of joiners. That's a wonderful thing, unless you happen to be their Member of Parliament. I know from speaking to my predecessors that East Renfrewshire is not always the easiest place in the world to represent. 3 different honourable members from 3 different parties have won and lost my constituency in the last decade. My immediate predecessor, Kirsten Oswald, deserves enormous praise for the service she gave to the constituency, which is typified by the fact that when she lost the constituency at one general election, she came back and fought again and won. I hope I should say that is not something which is repeated, but it's typical of how much she loved this constituency. Both she and Paul Masterton, my Conservative predecessor, have been a source of constant support and advice, and I thank them for that. I also want to make special tribute to the former honourable friend, but now just my friend, Jim Murphy, who served the constituency for 18 years. I know from my time knocking doors in the election how fondly he was remembered by the constituency, and it's been wonderful to talk to more long-standing honourable members to find out that he's still as fondly remembered in this place. Madam Deputy Speaker, prior to the election, I spent most of the last decade working with Democrats against dictators around the world. But not all of my predecessors had such a frosty relationship with authoritarians. In 1941, Rudolf Hess bailed out of his Messerschmitt over the fields outside of Eaglesham in my constituency and parachuted to the ground. The Deputy Führer of the Nazi Party was seeking to negotiate with Douglas Hamilton, a former Member of Parliament from East Renfrewshire, who Hess believed, perhaps unfairly, to be a Nazi sympathiser. Hess was swiftly captured by a local farmer at Pitchfork and then taken to Busby Scout Hall, apparently by an inebriated member of the National Guard at Pistol Point, and then taken to the Tower of London along the river that flows outside of here. And time may have passed, but I can tell you my constituents, informed by events in Ukraine and elsewhere, still have as little tolerance for dictators as they did back in the 1940s. Madam Deputy Speaker, my argument today has been that we should think more long-term in this House, but I make it in the knowledge that my own place here will only ever be temporary. And I'll close by saying why I feel that so acutely. My roots are in East Renfrewshire, where I was born and brought up, but my ancestors hail much closer to this chamber. My grandfather was born across the river in Lambeth. He was one of 7 children scattered to different orphanages and foster homes when his parents died. He went to his grave believing that his mother had been taken by consumption, and then his father had succumbed to old wounds from the Great War. But that story was a lie. It was a lie told to a boy to protect him from a horrible truth that was discovered when we researched our family tree. The truth was that my great-grandfather, overwhelmed by grief and overcome by poverty, decided that his children would have a better future without him, that their life would be better if he ended his. So he walked to Lambeth Pier and he threw himself into the freezing water that runs past this Parliament. As the once famous Newton Mearns poet Robert Pollock wrote, "Sorrows remembered sweeten present joy." Because today, if you stand on that place where my great-grandfather's story ended, you can look across to the river where his great-grandson just gave his maiden speech as a Member of Parliament, watched from the gallery by his own children. However long I serve on the banks of this river, I will always have an eye on the water flying by and my mind on the responsibility we have to our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
No doubt he'll do his family very proud, but for me, comfort breaks will never be the same. Maiden speech, Bobby D.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by acknowledging and congratulating the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire on that heartfelt speech. I thought it was very gracious of you as well to say that you're not in the most beautiful of the constituencies. I think you're at least in the top 600 and possibly higher after one or two whiskies. And can I also congratulate the member for Glasgow North on his maiden speech as well. I think the points he makes about engaging with the public and making sure that we restore trust in this place is really, really important. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to speak about Scotland in my maiden speech. I'm going to start by talking about where I came from. And with my parents in the gallery, and I promise to stay grounded, that's the place I want to start. I grew up on a council estate as the eldest of 3 boys. My dad worked long hours as a scaffolder, and my mum worked 2 jobs, one in Burton's by day and one as a cleaner at night. And things weren't always easy. At times got so tough at one point that as a young teenager, I moved into the care of my grandparents. And I found out in recent years that this is called kinship care. It's a pretty formal sounding name, but it's basically where family agree to take on family. I'm very grateful for my nan and pops for helping me back onto the right path, and I know that they would have been very proud of me if they had got to see this day. Of course, it wasn't just family that got me here. I had encouraging teachers, supportive friends, guiding therapists, a campaigning wife, and a totally unreasonable bunch of people called activists who volunteer a silly amount of time to the cause. To all those that have been involved in my messy pathway to now, and especially to the people of Carshalton and Wallington who have put their faith in me, thank you. I am utterly humbled to be here, and I don't take this responsibility lightly. Madam Deputy Speaker, I did plan on describing my constituency of Carshalton and Wallington as a hidden gem, but since I started in this place a few weeks ago, I keep bumping into staff that live there, so clearly it's a popular place. For those that don't know, Carshalton and Wallington is on the South London border with Surrey, or is in Surrey, depending on who you speak to. And I describe it as hidden because despite being a London borough, you won't find us on the tube map. There are no London Underground or London Overground services in our borough, and this is an issue that I will return to at a later date. But it is a gem. I'm not going to say it's the most beautiful, but it is pretty beautiful. It has beautiful ponds, it has many award-winning parks, we have the historic River Wandle, and so many good pubs, it's really difficult to avoid them at the weekend. I would like to take this moment to recognise my predecessor, Elliot Coburn. This House will remember when he bravely spoke out about his own struggles with mental health. I have great respect for his willingness and openness to share his story, and I am certain that his bravery will give courage to others to speak up and seek help too. I would also like to put on the record my recognition for another predecessor, Tom Brake. He served my community of Carshalton and Wallington for over 22 years. He is a true local champion. He is still spoken about so fondly on the doorstep. And this House will probably be aware of his tireless campaigning for St Helier Hospital, and I plan to take up this issue at a later date too. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is much more I would like to share about my constituency over time. Unlike the member for East Renfrewshire, I won't take up that time now because I'm keen to get involved in the debate today as well. I want to start by joining my honourable friend, the member for Richmond Park, in welcoming the thrust of the government's proposals in giving more powers to the Office for Budget Responsibility to scrutinise major fiscal announcements. The inappropriately named mini-budget sent shockwaves across the country. Mortgages soaring, pensions on the brink of collapse, and market confidence damaged so badly that I feel we'll be dealing with the trust issues caused by that disruption for quite some time. Yet the state of our country's finances is not just down to one fiscal event. The populism that infected everything that the last government did was laid bare by the Chancellor yesterday. And I am so angry about the mess that's been left behind. It is always the most vulnerable that suffer the most when the government gets things so drastically wrong. And we must never let such reckless gambles be taken with our country's finances ever again. Now, while I'm optimistic that a fiscal lock will provide the public and markets some reassurance on this, I do hope that the government does not feel locked into one particular model of fiscal management. The key lesson to take from disastrous mini-budget should be not that there's only one way to run the economy, but that whatever choices the government makes, they should be informed by good information and stand up to rigorous analysis. It will be my intention from these benches to encourage the government to take seriously the calls from many respected economists to ensure that fiscal responsibility goes hand in hand with maximising the growth potential of the country over the long term. This is particularly relevant to major capital investments, like the rebuilding of St Helier Hospital in my constituency. Our local NHS trust faces huge costs every year trying to maintain an unfit building. We must not forget that there is a cost to not investing too. And when talking about growth, let us remember that it not only has a rate, but a direction. And this necessarily involves political choices and cannot be left to expert analysis alone. While the OBR can rightly describe what actions will increase growth and by how much, we in this House still have a crucial role to play in selecting what actions will meet all of society's goals. And a purpose-driven industrial strategy, as proposed by the Liberal Democrats, will ensure we deliver the right sort of growth, not least in relation to green industries. The Chancellor is also right to reiterate that the government should not commit to any unfunded spending pledges. But there are many ways to fund the investment in our public services that we so desperately need. And you don't have to increase tax on ordinary workers to do so. If the Chancellor is stuck for ideas, then I would invite her to have a read of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, which includes ideas such as raising capital gains tax and reversing the Tories' cuts for banks. There are fairer ways of raising the revenue we need, and we should look at them seriously. And it's at this point that I turn back up to the gallery, and I have some regret that my maiden speech was on the intricacies of fiscal responsibility. So if you'd indulge me for a moment, before I close, I'd like to make a brief translation by putting my points into footballing terms. Dad, this is mainly for you. The former manager played six up front and got hammered. But that doesn't mean that the new manager has to revert to a defensive five at the back. There are many different styles of play out there, and I think some of them will have bigger rewards. So let's get the balance right and get our country winning again.
No doubt your mum and dad enjoying that up in the gallery. Now, another maiden speech, David Burton Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for granting me the opportunity to give my maiden speech today, and especially during these first few weeks of this new Labour government. And I welcome you too to your new place. I also thank the right honourable gentleman for Carshalton and Wallington for your maiden speech. Well done. And for my honourable friends for their maiden speeches too. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is truly the honour of my life to stand here today as the first ever Labour MP for Southend West and Lee. I'm excited to take on the challenges ahead, and I'm delighted to represent such a wonderful constituency such as this one. I'd like to start by giving my recognition and thanks to Anna Firth, my predecessor. Anna has been a good constituency MP and should be recognised for her work in standing up for her residents, championing the fight against knife crime, and of course, her private member's pet abduction bill, which she was so passionate about and which gained royal assent just before the dissolution of the last Parliament, a bill which I wholeheartedly support. But of course, it would be remiss of me to stand here today, Madam Deputy Speaker, and not recognise Anna Firth's predecessor, Sir David Amos. For however long my constituents choose to keep me in this place, I'll always be drawn to the shield behind me, remembering Sir David. His murder sent shockwaves not only through this place, but through the whole country. Sir David and I, whilst not agreeing politically, shared many common traits, none more so than our passion for community and the people we serve. I look across this chamber and see the shield dedicated to Joe Cox, again another wonderful MP whose life was cut short too soon. I was honoured to work closely with Joe's sister, my now honourable friend for Spen Valley, as she established the Joe Cox Foundation in her memory. Joe's words of having more in common than that which divides us always holds true for me. It's time for much more civility in politics. And the drive of that civility starts here, with all of us. Southend Western Leigh, Madam Deputy Speaker, has a wonderful, diverse community spirit, from Eastwood to St Lawrence, Pritterwell to Westborough, Belfair to Blenheim, and St Luke's residents, whom have now just been welcomed into our constituency. So many residents care deeply about their community, but like many others across the country, opportunity and life chances depend on your circumstances. My constituency is home to some of the most beautiful seaside properties. I'm going on that one. It's a beautiful place. However, there are still 12.1% of children living in poverty. Grassroots organisations such as the One Love Project, Trust Links, and the now famous Music Man Project, who recently performed at the Royal Albert Hall with Michael Ball and the band of His Majesty's Royal Marines, do amazing work to help bridge the gap. I'm pleased that with this new Labour government back in the service of our country, we will start the work of bridging the gap of opportunity for all. My constituency has some of the most impressive coastlines. On a sunny day, if you stand, a bit like today, if you stand overlooking the estuary in Leigh-on-Sea or Chalkwell or Westcliff, your imagination could take you away to some exotic clime. And we are blessed to be the 7th most sunniest place in the UK, according to recent data, with 1,884 hours of sunshine a year. Now, there's nothing more tranquil than finding a quiet spot to sit, reflect, and watch the world go by whilst gazing out to sea. From Leigh-on-Sea right up to Shoebury, in my honourable friend's constituency of Southend East and Rochford, we are incredibly fortunate. I'm claiming this. We are incredibly fortunate to have the most amazing places and vistas. We also have a buoyant fishing industry, with many businesses basing themselves in our historic fishing town of Old Leigh, with cockling being particularly popular. Many visitors and residents alike enjoy the delights of some freshly caught seafood from one of our local fisheries. I'm looking forward to working with the Thames Estuary Fishermen's Association, who are part of the Leigh Port Partnership, to ensure that this industry continues to grow and thrive. We're fortunate to have a growing international airport. Many remark on what a wonderful experience it is to fly to and from Southend Airport, and you can often find yourself moving from the plane, bags collected, and into your car or on the train home in less than 15 minutes after landing. Yes, 15 minutes after landing. Try it sometime. Of course, being by the sea, Southend has a popular tourist industry, and with connections from London spread over 2 separate train lines, we're often seen as a seaside magnet for day trippers. We often have several groups and individuals who enjoy cold water swimming, such as the Blue Tits Chill Swimmers, who are determined to get me out for an early morning swim. I just hope that rubber rings and armbands are acceptable. I'm delighted, though, that our government are bringing forward the Water Special Measures Bill, as I know many of my constituents care greatly about the quality of the water in which they bathe. Football clubs are a focal point of any community, and in Southend we are fortunate enough to have Southend United, known locally as the Shrimpers. For some, their football club is a lifeline, giving them the one opportunity to get out of the house at a weekend for the home game. Our club is a community asset, but over recent years, it's been sadly under threat. This insecurity has created much worry in the community. However, just over a week ago, we got the news everyone had been waiting for, as the club has been saved by a consortium of new owners. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Daniel Cowan, the leader of Southend City Council and his council officers, and the COSU Consortium for working with the previous owner to get this complex deal over the line. And of course, thanks go to the dedicated Shrimpers Trust for standing up for their fans. The situation with Southend United, as we have sadly seen with other clubs around the country too, highlights the need for the Football Governance Bill, which I'm pleased to see included as part of the recent King's speech. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have been told many times in my life that I've never achieved my dreams. The boy from a single-parent family, brought up in social housing, the boy who looked different to all the other kids in school and was often harshly reminded of that fact. So often it felt like I was on an uphill struggle. I felt like I was fighting so much harder than those around me to achieve my goals. From being the first person in my family to go to university, building my professional career, and of course, more recently, my political career. I want to thank those mentors that I had in my life who believed in me and who helped me slash through that elusive glass ceiling. You all know who you are. I hope I can now be an example and a mentor to others, and that they will see that anything is possible, no matter who you are. I'd like to finish by paying tribute to my close family and friends who have always had faith in me, especially my husband Mark, who is here today, for his unwavering support for me over the years, and who continues to stand alongside me as we enter this new phase in our lives. I'm immensely proud to represent the 103,000 residents in my constituency, and I'm looking forward to giving them the support they need to live a happier, healthier and fairer life, driven by our mission-led government focused on economic growth. A government who have learned from the mistakes of the past and who will ensure they never happen again. And I welcome the Budget Responsibility Bill and its measures, which will bring greater fiscal accountability and economic stability. My constituents, like so many others, will benefit directly from this government's exciting programme of change, as laid out in the recent King's speech, and I look forward to playing my part in it. Thank you.
Sir David Amos was a mentor of mine. Thank you for mentioning him. He's very sorely missed. Now we go to another maiden speech, Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's wonderful to see you take your place in the chair. And a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Southend West and Lee, who spoke passionately about his constituency and also about embracing all that we have in common rather than divides us. Also very interesting to hear that you live in the 7th sunniest place. I look forward to coming back to that later in my speech. And it's an honour to address the Chamber as the newly elected Member of Parliament for the beautiful Chichester constituency. The constituency has undergone some boundary changes in this general election, and so I would like to start by thanking the two predecessors who represented the residents that I now serve. Firstly, Gillian Keegan was the MP for Chichester since 2017 and was the first female MP to represent the constituency. She served as Secretary of State for Education and proudly championed apprenticeships and the opportunity that her own apprenticeship afforded her after growing up in Knowlesley in Liverpool and leaving school at 16. She was well liked by the Conservative Party and across the House, and although our politics are different, I wish her well in her future endeavours. I would also like to pay tribute to Nick Gibb, the member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton from 1997. Both Bursted and Pagham residents mentioned to me on the doorsteps during the last few months that he was a popular MP that had served his constituents well, which no doubt added to their frustration when they realised they were moving to be part of the Chichester constituency when their hearts belonged with Bognor Regis. So I'd like to take this opportunity to reassure those residents that my love for the area that I've grown up in knows no bounds, and from Bursted to Bosham, Selsey to Southbourne, Westbourne to the Witcherings, Fishbourne to Funtington, and all the other areas that didn't fit within my poor attempt at alliteration, I will champion you all. Madam Deputy Speaker, today is the final day in the chamber before recess, and although I have no doubt that MPs will be rushing back to their own constituencies to spend every possible moment there, if they do manage to steal away for a long weekend, then I relish the opportunity to be a tour guide for a brief moment and tell you why a weekend in Chichester is a weekend well spent. Although my honourable friend, the member for Eastbourne, has already laid claim to the glory of having the sunniest town in the UK, Chichester boasts the high accolade of being the sunniest city, with just under 2,000 hours of sunshine a year. This is not the only way that this glorious city punches above its weight. You certainly won't be short of things to do, with beautiful coastline, sailing opportunities at Bosham, Delkey, Itchenor and Birdham, and the sandy beach of West Wittering, as well as a plethora of cultural offerings, from the internationally renowned regional theatre, Chichester Festival Theatre, the Pallant House and Oxmarket Galleries, the Novium Museum and Fishbourne Roman Palace, and even a spot of racing, both cars and horses, at the Goodwood Racecourse. An afternoon can be easily spent soaking up the history of the city surrounded in Roman walls, or surrounded in nature at Pagham Harbour, Medmery Reserve, or following the River Lavant, a precious chalk stream. I would also not be forgiven, especially by the head of department, if I didn't mention the excellent University of Chichester that I had the pleasure of obtaining my degree from. We're also the birthplace of notable figures such as the astronaut Tim Peake and the singer-songwriter Tom Odell, and we're home to Kate Winslet and authors Greg and Kate Moss. You can understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, why my very special constituency is a desirable location for those looking to relocate to an area with so much to offer. But with the majority of the district sitting within the South Downs National Park, 100% of the housing allocation is built in only 20% of the land, with a lack of infrastructure surrounding these developments, with residents reporting a real struggle to get a doctor's appointment, sign up with an NHS dentist, find school places for their children that can meet their needs, or simply travel from A to B through the traffic on the A27. As a low-lying coastal plain, many communities are also subjected to relentless flooding after developments on floodplains and a lack of maintenance on the Rife. I am sure those in the chamber will also appreciate how important the water quality is to so many industries in my constituency. These include tourism, fishing, water sports and sailing. Therefore, it pains me to say that some of the most active storm overflows are in my constituency. And Chichester Harbour, which is a site of special scientific interest, has been downgraded to an unfavourable declining condition. The River Lavant has warning signs along the bed, encouraging residents and visitors to wash their hands if they come into contact with our water. And those that enjoy swimming in our water are weighing up the health benefits of cold water swimming against how regularly they become ill from doing so. Trust in our water companies and the water regulator is at an all-time low, and the Liberal Democrats have called for measures to address the issue that is a blight on constituencies like mine. The average house price in Chichester, Madam Deputy Speaker, is an eye-watering £455,000, and residents regularly express